A long-haired guy was sitting on a chair and carving a car figurine out of wood. It was a man named Albert. He used to live on Earth, but was reborn in the body of a beggar. He was in his house. He had to go through 100 years of training, but now he had only been training for 4 years. The hero entered a room with a large model of the city. He wanted to return to his previous life. Albert looked at the wooden skyscrapers and missed home. The hero walked out of his hut. He was in the territory of the Heavenly Throne sect. The guy pushed off the ground and soared into the air like a bird. Suddenly, a man called out to him. It was Chris. He was also trained in various techniques, but he stood out especially for his physical strength. When Albert landed next to him, the boy began to beg him to teach him the technique of flying. The hero advised Chris to stop training his attack technique and switch to flying. The guy was a little offended by this joke, because 100 strength was his calling card. The main character explained that 3 months ago, several wild animals escaped from their cages. These creatures seriously mauled Chris. He was bleeding. His clothes were torn. The wild wolves opened their fanged jaws to tear him to pieces. Suddenly, the animals were pierced by sharp stakes that appeared out of nowhere. Albert saved the boy and asked how he was feeling. Chris begged the hero for a long time to teach him such a cool move. After some time, the guy heard that one of the mentors would give a lecture on attacking techniques. Albert believed that defensive techniques were most important because to survive was to win. Chris went to a lecture, and the protagonist studied the board with new techniques. Among the tablets, there was one special one. It was the ability to use medicinal plants in alchemy. Albert came to a nice girl who was accepting people who wanted to take courses. She stated that there were only 3 free spots left, and that the course would cost 50 spiritual stones. The hero was a little shocked because for a whole year of work he received only 100. The girl assured that it was possible to learn this technique only with the help of a teacher. After some thought, Albert agreed and gave 50 stones. When the hero turned away, the girl recognized him as a fool because he tried to learn alchemy with almost no money. In the evening, Albert strolled through the local market and hoped that his investment would bring benefits. Suddenly, a man called out to him. It was Uncle Brad. The man began to scold the hero for not paying the bride ransom, and Albert felt ashamed. In the past, Brad's daughter Lily and the hero agreed to get married when the guy collected money for the ransom. It was just a joke. The protagonist said goodbye to his father-in-law and headed home, asking him not to tell his daughter about their meeting. Brad said with a smile that Lily already knew. Suddenly, a girl attacked Albert. She was serious. Lily clung to the hero so tightly that he asked her to loosen her grip. The hero told the girl that their engagement was just a bad joke. The father was angry. Lily was obsessive, and according to local tradition, Albert was obliged to marry her. The girl took the hero's gift out of her pocket. The guy tried his best to convince Lily that everything that was happening was just a simple misunderstanding. A tear ran down the hero's cheek. He was in a hopeless situation. After some time, having miraculously gotten rid of the crazy bride, Albert headed home and noticed something strange. Chris waved at him from the ground, holding a cute little sheep in his hand. Albert was worried that the guy would be caught by the local police, but he reassured him by saying that he had bought a sheep, so there was no reason to worry. Chris went to the hero's house to cook the animal. The guy was amazed by the technology that hid the hut under the dome. Chris assured that with his abilities, Albert could become a rather important person in the sect. The hero shut the guy up and asked him to never talk about it again. After a short verbal altercation, the protagonist asked his friend to bring him a sheep. A few minutes later, a delicious meal prepared using a secret technique was lying on the table. To complement this sumptuous dinner, Chris took a bottle of wine out of his bag. Albert immediately noticed the catch, because the guy would never have spent so much money on such an ordinary day. Chris reported that a high-ranking mentor had noticed him, so he would soon leave and would not see the hero for a long time. The guy burst into tears and thanked Albert for saving him. Now they might never see each other again because Chris would be sent on dangerous missions. After some time, the guys ate the sheep and Chris thanked the hero for the excellent food. As the boy was about to leave the gate, Albert threw him a scroll. Chris thanked the protagonist again and hurried off to his business. Albert didn't have many friends in this world, so he was very worried about the guy. The next morning, the hero was lying on a deck chair, planning to grow rice, sell it, and learn alchemy and forging. In this universe, there were kingdoms in which celestial beings lived. To earn such a title, one must devote more than 1,000 years to spiritual training. But Albert couldn't do them now, because if he died before a certain date, he would not be reborn. The hero created several birds in his palm and launched them into the air. Having flown far enough, they exploded spectacularly. The main character was in despair because he could not show his abilities to anyone, because there would be a person who would decide to kill him out of envy. Suddenly, Albert realized that he could teach new techniques to other people. In addition, Future students will be obliged to protect their teacher. Suddenly, the security system reported that someone was trying to scan the location of the hero's house. The guy decided not to pay attention to such a trifle, but rather to focus on new techniques. He came up with a spell that would allow him to take the soul of a beast and place it in a new body when needed. To test his idea, Albert grabbed a sparrow flying past. The hero, with the help of complex technology, was able to turn the bird into porcelain. But unfortunately, the sparrow did not fly, but fell right on Albert's head. The frustrated hero admitted that he needed to train even more. At this time, Chris was in the forest and laughing. It turned out that he easily killed a wildcat thanks to the technique that the main character taught him. In the morning, a man came to Chris. He hoped that the guy would not be attacked by a dangerous animal. When he saw the dead cat, the man dropped the fox carcass from his hands and was very surprised. The fighter couldn't even imagine that such a talented guy would join them. There were a total of 4 ranks of fighters in this world, starting from D and ending with A. Level A masters received the best of everything, and they were trained to become future elites. Chris, suspecting that his comrade was shocked by his capabilities, put on an innocent face. The man encouraged the boy by saying that he would need to kill a few more beasts to earn an A rank. By evening, Chris managed to get to Albert's house and told him what had happened. The guy suggested that the hero also join the combat squad. His skills would be very useful there. Albert did not like to kill and was afraid of dying himself. Besides, warriors occupied a lower position than alchemists. Chris tried to convince the hero that, in his opinion, the ability to instill terror in enemies is every man's dream. The guy assured that the main character's abilities could even elevate him to the status of a celestial being. Plus, Chris will be able to travel there with him. Albert asked why the boy wanted to get into the kingdom of heaven so much. The hero tried to convince his friend that that world was too cruel and terrible. The protagonist cut a piece of meat in half with a spell and shared it with Chris. Greedily eating the treat, the boy offered Albert to take him on as an apprentice. The hero couldn't believe his ears. He imagined Chris as a future A-rank fighter. The young man said that one of his ancient ancestors was a wise warrior. After his death, the family fell into decline, but he left a list in which almost all of his knowledge was recorded. From them, Chris read about the fierce fighters of other sects. The Heavenly Arrow sect is considered the strongest in the world. People who studied old and created new techniques were called spellcasters. Chris begged Albert to make him such a master of spells. The hero said that the boy was already 18, so it was too late for him to become a student. Using an unusual technique, the main character erased a small fragment of his friend's memory. Chris didn't remember anything. Albert reminded that he wanted to become an A-rank warrior and asked to teach him a couple of techniques. The guy made a cute face like he was a kitten and thanked his friend for his help. The next day, the hero wrote down everything he learned from Chris. He was filled with knowledge of this world. Albert wondered if he could reach the central continent. The main character threw these bad thoughts aside and decided to take a day off. After a while, the guy got bored and dreamed of a computer with internet access. The prospect of a century of training did not appeal to him. Suddenly, a huge flying ship appeared right above the hero's house. The ship was guarded on all sides by specially trained fighters on Firebirds. Albert decided that it was an expedition that went in search of valuable resources. The hero was distracted by a knock at the gate. Chris was standing on the threshold. The guy didn't look well. He injured his leg while doing the task, so he took the day off. Albert scolded Chris for not using his flying technique to defend himself. The hero called his friend a lousy fighter who doesn't think ahead. In fact, Chris came to Albert to get advice on killing the mighty beast. The hero did not agree. The guy reproached him for hiding the true power of his abilities from everyone. After some thought, the magician decided to train Chris in exchange for information about flying ships. Albert moved through the air and transported himself and his comrade into a certain space. It was a training illusion. Chris was supposed to have a trial fight. The magician created a stone-praying mantis, and the fighter had only 15 minutes to deal with it. The insect attacked Chris so suddenly that he barely dodged it. The guy fired several fire spears at his enemy. The mantis easily dodged the projectiles, and the fighter was perplexed. Albert admitted that Chris moved quite quickly but released his pikes too slowly. The guy was angry because he couldn't deal with such a simple enemy. Suddenly, the mantis dealt him a powerful blow and Chris flew back. The fight ended, and the guy was very upset by the defeat. Albert advised him to watch the enemy's behavior and predict his movements. The hero put 2 fingers to the guy's forehead. He suggested that he use a technique that would restrict the enemy's movements. The magician suggested that Chris have another training session in the future to work on his shortcomings. Albert sat down on a chair in a businesslike manner and asked his friend to tell him everything about flying ships. The guy said that 500 years ago, the Supreme Mentor collected everything that the sect's servants had and went to the central continent to build a ship. Because the inhabitants had nothing left, they suffered from hunger and went mad at the sight of the spiritual stones. After some time, the Mentor returned on a brand new ship and the life of the sect began to improve. On the ship, the ruler planned to collect resources in the Great Sea, which was considered endless. The ship had the ability to fly to protect itself from deep-sea monsters. There were also rumors that it was possible to go beyond the celestial boundary with it. Chris pointed to the blue sky. Albert thought the guy meant space, but unfortunately, only the most developed sects could leave the kingdom. The hero asked if it was possible to get on board the ship and inspect it. Chris explained that spell researchers and A-rank warriors were allowed in there. Masters of alchemy and forging, and of course the captain of the ship itself, could also get on board the ship. Albert's dreams of getting there were dashed because, at best, he would have to train for hundreds of years and try not to die. Chris offered him to join the combat squad together to make it easier, but the hero refused. The magician explained that he would now be busy selling rice to pay for the forging and alchemy courses. The next morning, Albert arrived at the alchemy training halls. He thought to himself about how to quickly return to his world to his beloved parents. The protagonist approached the man standing at the gate and introduced himself as a new student. The man explained that the boy would have to pay 500 spiritual stones for 2 years of training. Albert was very reluctant to part with his money. Behind the gate, the hero saw a very tall tower. He was impressed. The guy accompanying the magician wondered why such poor people were getting involved in alchemy. The man hypocritically wished Albert success in his studies and said goodbye. The hero entered the classroom and saw a bunch of students. Suddenly, he smelled a pleasant, sweet scent of perfume. This scent came from the beautiful girl standing in the center of the office. Albert, struck by her beauty, introduced himself and asked who she was. The girl called herself Claire. She was the mentor's daughter and could conduct the lesson in his absence. The hero answered her uncertainly, and she thought that he was unwell. Albert lied when he said he was worried about falling behind the other students. The girl calmed the hero down and suggested that they work individually. The lesson began and Claire asked the main character to listen to her very carefully. Albert noted that events were developing too quickly. It seemed he had fallen in love. The guy began to imagine how he would have to be alone with her in the evening. These thoughts made the hero very excited and his nose started bleeding. At this time, Claire announced that today they would be studying plant processing techniques. Albert was incredibly happy. He would finally be able to become a master of alchemy. After a month, he was able to begin real training of his skills. Now he was learning the technique of non-contact use of fire. The hero was surprised because he thought he had mastered her with ease. Suddenly, the pot exploded and left a trail of soot on Albert's face. The novice alchemist was very scared. These cauldrons were very expensive. To his regret, he discovered a rather large crack on it. It was believed that to create his first pill, a student had to spend 20 cauldrons, and to become a mentor, more than 1,000. Albert confidently decided to continue trying. The rules did not apply to him. A short time later, 2 more explosions thundered, and the hero's clothes were badly damaged. The student looked into the cauldron and burst into tears of joy. He had succeeded. The hero understood how to do it, and decided that now he would be able to recoup the cost of the boiler and make a little profit. The next day, he went to the alchemy training hall again. Mentor Thomas, who was also Claire's father, asked if any of the students had been able to complete his task of creating a pill. The students' faces twisted and sweat ran down them. But only Albert remained calm. The budding alchemists admitted that they had blown up more than 1 cauldron. Suddenly, the mentor stared very intently at the protagonist. Thomas created a noise barrier and asked his daughter to be more careful with it. The teacher explained that he saw serious potential in him. Later, the hero returned to training. He tried to do everything without mistakes in order to save up for a new boiler. Suddenly, he heard a noise in the lighthouse. Apparently, he had a neighbor. He approached the building and Lily jumped on him. The girl decided to visit her husband and reported that she had reached a new level of her abilities. Lily pushed off the ground and began to float in the air. The girl boasted that one mentor wanted to take her as a student. Albert praised Lily. She also reminded him of the ransom that the hero must bring to his father. The magician offered to cook dinner for Lily. The girl thanked her husband for the delicious food, and the hero reminded her that their wedding was just a joke. The guy considered himself an unsuitable candidate for the role of her husband. At these words, Lily flooded the entire table with her tears. 3 hours later, the girl was still crying, and Albert tried to calm her down. He eventually agreed to pay ransom for her. Lily immediately calmed down and began to eat rice. Albert was furious that he was simply being used. The hero resigned himself to this wedding and kindly stroked the bride's head. After a while, the main character was devouring a delicious pancake. The girl really wanted to try it. Suddenly, a beautiful woman with a blue bird appeared in the sky. At the sight of her, Albert's mouth began to water, like a dog at the sight of a piece of meat. The hero hoped that the system took pity on him and gave him a beauty for all his suffering. The girl stated that she had come here for a man from the Heavenly Throne sect. Albert decided that they were talking about him and was already preparing to go with the stranger. Suddenly, the woman lifted Lily into the air and offered to become her mentor. A projection of a man appeared in the air, and he asked not to take the girl with them because they needed another person. The girl insisted on her own, declaring that their destinies were connected. Lily asked the hero what she should do. Many predatory eyes were looking at Albert, and he felt uneasy. The guy replied that Lily should not miss such an opportunity. The bride wanted to visit her lover. The woman allowed her to do so. Lily was the bearer of the heavenly spirit. The guy she chose was the chosen one of heaven. The girl agreed, and the teacher seated her on her blue bird. They flew away. Albert was glad. He finally got rid of his annoying little wife. The hero became motivated to become stronger and decided to study the recently purchased book of techniques. Suddenly, a very strong and courageous guy appeared on the threshold of his house. It was Chris. He was killing animals in the forest. Stronger than him, the guy came back to rest. The guy asked how to deal with the two remaining enemies. They were too strong. One of them was a ground eater, a monster that would bury itself in the ground when it saw danger. The second was a very fast cat that could inflict fatal wounds. Chris asked his friend to teach him a technique to defeat them. Albert agreed, but this training would be more difficult than the previous one. Now he has created two praying mantises that have the abilities of an earth eater and a cat. While the hero was explaining to Chris how to deal with them, one of the insects attacked him. The magician pierced the enemy with one gesture without even flinching. The guy was shocked by his friend's abilities. Suddenly, Chris was attacked by another praying mantis. Albert finished off the nasty insect again with just one blow. The boy begged the magician to teach him such a powerful technique. The main character made fun of his friend and said that he needed to shave his head to learn this ability. In the end, the guy, through tears, agreed. Albert looked at his comrade and laughed very loudly. Chris shaved anyway, and the hero praised him for his courage, barely holding back his laughter. The upset guy asked why the main character was so strong but not shaved. The Joker said that he was not trying to become stronger, so there was no need for a haircut. Albert pushed his friend to the gate and ordered him to practice this technique at home. Now that he had dealt with the annoying comrade, it was time to get down to important matters. 3 months later, Lily was already flying on a blue bird in an unknown kingdom. The mentor reproached the girl that her skills were worthless and that it was too early for her to think about returning home. The woman remembered a recent nightmare. Monsters circled around her, and she herself was chained and pierced with a spear. It was a sign of disaster, and she believed that only Lily could prevent it. The young girl asked permission to go for a walk and meet her husband. The mentor allowed her to walk around a bit, but forbade her from seeing her lover. Meanwhile, Albert decided to visit the forging training hall. He was dazzled by the sight of a pile of shining heads of students. One of the students told a friend that his friend from the combat unit shaved and became very strong. The main character regretted his actions. His joke turned out to be rather unsuccessful. After a while, most of the sect's disciples shaved their heads, which was a real sensation. Meanwhile, the hero complained that learning to forge was too hard. He had already spent 10,000 stones. Suddenly, the guy saw his old friend and called out to him. It was his friend named Dylan. He was quite plump and came from a rich family. The fat man heard about Albert's success in alchemy and decided to reward him with a spiritual stone, but the boy refused. The hero suspected that Dylan had business with him. The magician invited the guy to visit and treated him to a cup of tea. The fat man explained that he had come up with an idea to unite students studying outside the sect. Albert was surprised by this. He thought that he did not care about ordinary people because he was the descendant of a rich family. Dylan planned to create a kind of alliance of people willing to help each other. For help in this matter, the hero will be able to receive news from the sect among the first. He will also be able to make useful connections by teaching inexperienced newcomers. Dylan was confident that the alliance would flourish if Albert joined them. As a parting gift, the fat man gave the magician a magic ball to maintain communication. Albert said goodbye to his old friend. Suddenly, a very familiar voice began to whisper in his ear. The hero turned around and saw Claire. He explained that he was just seeing a friend. The beauty suggested going to Albert's house. He had never seen such beautiful girls in real life. The guy kindly treated her to some delicious tea. Claire was very nervous. The girl felt uneasy and began to notice something strange about herself. In her thoughts, she admitted that the more she looked at the hero, the more she realized that she had fallen in love. Claire reproached herself. She must not forget the true purpose of her visit. She placed her hands on the table imperiously and asked why Albert did not want to become part of the alchemy department. Claire moved even closer. She was worried because the hero did not want to become her father's student. The main character confessed everything. Alchemy was just a way to make money by selling pills. The girl begged him not to kill his talent and to find a mentor. Albert decided to reveal his plan. He asked Claire if she was on board the flying ship. The girl answered positively, and the hero told her about his dream of building the same one for himself. The magician didn't want Claire's father to waste his time and energy teaching him. The beauty seemed to be furious at what she heard. She remembered how her brother left the family to become the best blacksmith master. The girl's gaze became sad and she asked Albert not to give up. Claire left. The main character looked after her for a long time. The guy enjoyed the freedom and the fact that he had no obligations to anyone. Suddenly, Dylan's magic ball began to vibrate in his pocket. It contained all the news of the sect. Among them was the news about Chris. It turned out that the guy started dating the most beautiful student of the sect named Ava. The future warrior talked a lot about Albert, and they decided to visit him. The main character congratulated his friend on the fact that he was able to win the heart of such a good girl. The magician suggested talking inside the hut. Chris said that Eva was infected by a monster while they were on a mission, and now the girl couldn't sleep normally. Albert used the aura cleansing technique to help her. A soul eater flew out of the girl's body. The main character killed the spirit and asked his friend to be careful. Eva admired the magician's skill and suggested that they go with him to open the secret portal. The hero considered this venture too risky, so he refused. Chris mentioned that you can stumble upon something valuable in the portal, even on the records of the forging masters. Albert pricked up his ears, his eyes lighting up with excitement. The hero agreed. Now he needed 1,000 spiritual stones to enter. In the evening, he began to study the basics of forging in order to be as prepared as possible. This activity required a lot of things: raw materials, runes, spiritual fire. The most important thing is to insert the rune into an object that has not yet cooled down. Albert found forging more interesting than alchemy lessons. On the ball, Dylan praised the protagonist for learning 2 crafts at once. The fat man decided to share with him the secret of combining these activities. Later, the magician went to the forge halls. He gave the duty officer a spiritual stone and asked him to give him a room. Everything necessary to start training was here. The room was very hot, so Albert used the ice armor technique. To begin with, he decided to cross scarlet steel and iron ore. Dylan said that a person studying forging and alchemy should not count on help from heaven. The hero began to forge metals. First, he processed the ore with hammers. Now the blacksmith added molten steel and formed the sword. It was time to insert the runes. The hero decided to make it hard as a rock and light as a feather. Unfortunately, the weapon exploded at the final stage. Albert was depressed. He wasted 400 spiritual stones. A man entered the room and asked what happened. It was the manager. Blacksmith's halls, the hero was ashamed of his ineptitude. The magician came up with a plan. The man is obliged to teach him, otherwise he will not go anywhere. 3 days later, Chris and Eva were flying to the entrance of the secret portal. Suddenly, something flew past them. It was Albert. He felt sorry for the poor crane on which the couple was flying. Chris was amazed that his friend was riding on a forged sword. The immodest protagonist asked to be called a forging master from now on. The long-bearded man announced the rules for being on the other side of the portal. Chris hoped that the hero would go with them, but he destroyed his hopes. Instead, he gave him a special crystal. The guy could send a signal, and Albert would come to the rescue. The fighter thanked his friend. The main character flew into the opened portal with lightning speed. The hero, left alone, looked at the beautiful landscape of the green forest. He had to spend a whole month here, so the magician decided to build a small base here. Suddenly, wild animals jumped on him out of nowhere. Albert turned around and looked at them with a terrible look. He used a special technique against them and ordered them to bring useful things. The hero went in search of the runes left here by the forging masters. On the way, the magician came across a small lake and decided to examine it. Suddenly, a column of water shot out of it, as if a volcano had erupted. There was an unknown guy standing on the water's surface, apparently also from the Heavenly Throne sect. The young man introduced himself as Nicholas. His face was beautiful. Albert was in a state of shock. The stranger was holding a magic sword in his hand. The protagonist greeted him and said that he was an outer disciple of the sect. Nicholas was glad to meet him. He looked like the main character. The young blacksmith did not understand what he wanted. The guy extended his hand to Albert. In his palm lay a beautiful pearl. It seems he wanted the magician not to tell anyone about the things he found. The hero thought that Nicholas was also a real person who had ended up in this world. The magician began to ask him questions related to the culture of the earth. The young man insisted that he did not understand what was being discussed. The protagonist accepted the pearls and promised to keep his mouth shut. Nicholas said goodbye to the stranger kindly. Albert decided to keep his distance from him. The young man jumped on his sword. He believed that their paths might still cross. The hero would not want to be nearby if something bad happened to him. Nicholas left behind only eyeless turtles in the lake. By evening, Albert had collected a large number of different resources and was resting in the hut. Suddenly, there was a knock on the front door. The hero became wary. Opening the door, he saw a bunch of green eyes in front of him, looking at him angrily. The guy decided that there was a whole crowd of ghosts standing in front of him. He was scared to death. It turned out that these were wolves he had tamed, and Albert calmed down. They brought with them some flowers, a piece of red copper, tree fruits, and spiritual stones. The tired animals immediately went to bed, and the hero realized that they had collected all this from the corpses. The magician hid the hut from prying eyes with the help of technology and went to bed. To his surprise, the hero woke up early and decided to have breakfast. From behind him, he heard the sound of a man flying on a sword. It was Nicholas. He sheathed his weapon and greeted the protagonist in a friendly manner. Albert invited the wanderer to eat with him. The young man was simply delighted with the taste of the freshly cooked soup. The hero asked what the guy was doing, and he explained that he was a candidate for apprentice to the master swordsman Harry. The aspiring blacksmith predicted a great future for him with such a mentor. Nicholas told his story. He used to be a bright student, but his abilities began to fade. Now he is forced to accumulate wealth in every possible way so that if he becomes a simple citizen, he can live a normal life. Albert encouraged the boy and advised him not to give up, in case his strength returned. Nicholas approached the hero and sincerely thanked him for his words of support. The young man expressed a desire to become friends with the main character. The magician was silent, but in his head he did not want to start such a friendship. An hour later, Albert came across a huge spiritual tree from which he could build a flying ship. He took out his magic sword and prepared to cut it. Suddenly, a giant wild bear ran towards him from the thicket. Confident in his powers, the hero ordered the sword to attack the monster. To his surprise, right at the moment of impact, the animal's fur turned to stone. A moment later, the bear rushed to attack again, but immediately howled from unbearable pain. It turned out that Albert used the technique of invisible deadly needles, and the lifeless body of the beast fell to the ground. Half a day later, the main character finally finished building his ship. Suddenly, the alarm went off, meaning Chris was in trouble. The hero immediately boarded his ship and went to help his friend. At this time, Chris was saving his beloved Eva from wild bees. The girl was scared to death and hoped that Albert would still make it to their rescue. Suddenly, the bees shot their stingers straight at the couple. They were deadly. The guy held his beloved tightly in his arms. His eyes seemed to be burning. Chris ate the acceleration pill at lightning speed and managed to dodge the projectiles. Meanwhile, the protagonist noticed them with the help of a vision-enhancing technology. Chris and Eva were incredibly happy. They would finally be saved. Unfortunately, the angry bees surrounded the couple, and the situation became almost hopeless. Albert stood on the edge of the ship and prepared for battle. He used the sound wave destruction technique. It was too strong. The souls left the bees. Their lifeless bodies began to fall to the ground like drops of rain. The main character hooked his friends with a special hook and began to lift them onto the ship. After some time, the hero was frying meat over a fire. He was squeezed out like a lemon. Chris woke up and thought he was in hell and started screaming. The guy rushed to hug his beloved. Albert threw him an elixir that would help him cope with the consequences of the sound wave. Chris began to thank his friend. He had saved his life twice already. The hero scolded the guy and demanded 22,000 spiritual stones for saving him and the elixir. Ava woke up and pinched her beloved on the butt, and he jumped in pain. The girl pressed herself against Chris and began to cry with happiness. They were alive. She thanked Albert from the bottom of her heart, and he asked who came up with the idea to go to the bees. Chris scratched the back of his head in shame. He just wanted to try out the escape technique the hero taught him. In addition, insects had honey, which could cure diseases, and the guy planned to cure Eve's mother. In this way, Chris hoped to reduce the ransom amount for the girl. Albert remembered how in his past life, relationships also took a lot of money from him. The couple was only able to get half of what they had planned, which should have been enough. Eva reported that such a jar could cost up to 2,000 spiritual stones. The main character asked them to tell him where he could be found. After a while, the hero was already riding a deer into a bamboo grove, where a lair of wild bees was located. The guy ordered the animal to hide, and he himself headed deeper into the thicket. After 3 days, he finally came across the insects and began to seduce them. The bees mistook him for a beautiful queen. Now they were under the power of the protagonist and bowed before him. The magician finally found mountains of honey that would make him rich. Suddenly, a real queen bee appeared. She did not succumb to the hero's influence. The guy used a consciousness-paralyzing technique against her. The bee was invulnerable because it and the honey were the property of the Heavenly Throne sect, and disciples were allowed to take a maximum of 1,000 liters. The main character was very sad. His great plan to get rich failed. One of the elders was watching the magician and was amazed by the boy's abilities. Albert began to collect honey, but the elder's voice from the sky ordered him to stop. A few minutes later, the hero loaded 500 liters of liquid onto his ship and set off. Right above him, he noticed a trace of a magic sword. Apparently, it was Nicholas again. The young man approached the mountains of honey and began to calculate his future fortune. Suddenly, a pillar of light fell from the sky, and the elder created a dome that forbade anyone from approaching the grove for the next 150 years. During his air journey, the hero came across the estate of an alchemist master. Albert was furious. All this time, he was trying to find the blacksmith master. There was only 1 hour left before the portal closed. The magician had to hurry. In the estate, he found a bunch of scrolls with quite useful spells. The hero remembered that the portal would close very soon. The guy miraculously managed to get out of there, and Chris and Eva were already meeting him at the exit. The guy suggested that Albert go to the tavern and thank him for saving him. The main character agreed. This month was very difficult. After a long time, the magician was already at home and lying on piles of spiritual stones. He managed to sell the honey. He sent a letter to the Alliance base for Dylan. The hero exchanged 300,000 spiritual stones for a bunch of resources for forging. After 3 years of blacksmithing, he still couldn't insert some runes correctly. Albert came up with the idea of using another rune as a mediator. The hero decided to try to use his idea in practice. The fragments came together to form a brand new magic sword. The blacksmith rushed to embrace him as if he were a loved one, and now the weapon was called the Thousander. The main character received news from the sect through a magic ball. A recruitment of blacksmiths for training had opened. Over these long 3 years, Albert has already developed to the 8th level. He had no doubt that he would soon be able to fight on equal terms with a much stronger enemy. Thanks to his beast summoning technique, the hero could call upon an entire dragon for help. Soon the magician finally returned home and sprawled out on the lounger. Chris and Eva appeared on the threshold. They were incredibly happy. The guy shared the good news that they would soon be getting married, and he asked Albert to be sure to come to the celebration. The main character and the lovers had a nice dinner. He thought that there was no time for a relationship in his plans. After the meal, the magician stood up from his chair and asked to follow him. Chris and Eva were perplexed. He led them into a room where weapons and shields he had forged hung on the walls. The hero didn't have a wedding gift, so he offered the couple to choose anything. Eva asked if she could take the Swords of Insight. They were very useful in battle. Chris asked permission to take the 1000th. It could crumble into pieces and take any form. Albert gave them the chosen weapons and saw them off. Deep in his soul, he regretted the time and resources spent on forging them. A month later, the hero went to the capital of the sect. There would soon be a wedding. He was carrying a giant sack on his back, and the journey to the ceremony site was not short. Luckily, the magician had a flying ship, and he called it to lighten his load. Suddenly, the hero heard a familiar sound from behind. It seems it was Nicholas again. The guy was incredibly happy to see his friend after 3 years. The young man immediately noticed the magic ship. Nicholas said that he was going to his friend's wedding. Albert was stunned and asked if his name was Chris. The young man was wildly delighted. He would finally be able to spend time with the hero. Nicholas offered to get there on his personal ship. It was much better than the main character's vessel. When Albert climbed on board, the ship flew at supersonic speed. Carrying Nicholas offered the hero a whole buffet as a sign of friendship. Suddenly, the guy jumped up and asked to wait while he dealt with some insects. He threw 5 balls of different elements at the enemy at once, and the hero envied his skill. Albert saw 5 hostile people opposite the bow of the ship. Nicholas apologized for the inconvenience. He planned to distract the enemies and send the ship with the magician to its destination. The 5 began to quickly approach the heroes. The young man warned that he would deal with any of the enemies. The enemies responded to his words only with mockery. It seems they are confident in their own strength. One of the enemies ordered a guy named Henry to deal with the main character. Nicholas tried to stop Henry to protect Albert. Unfortunately, the gang leader interrupted his actions. He advised the young man to try to protect himself at the moment. A pillar of fire burst out of nowhere into the sky and a major explosion occurred. At this time, Albert promised himself never to go outside the sect again, so as not to get into similar situations. His thoughts were interrupted by Henry, who suddenly ran towards him. The hero decided to use the technique he had been putting off until an emergency. From the small bowl, the soul of a giant dragon burst into the air. The soul climbed inside the wooden copy of the beast. The enemy became even more determined. He was anticipating a wonderful battle. The boy set his pet centipede on Albert, but the dragon killed it with one swipe of its paw. The hero's eyes lit up. He felt superiority over his opponent. The hero ordered the beast to deal with Henry, and it immediately attacked him. The guy was bleeding, but he was not going to give up. He used an unknown technique. The protagonist used all kinds of barriers to protect himself from her. Unfortunately, he didn't succeed. It turned out to be a technique for damaging the psyche. Albert lost consciousness and fell straight overboard the ship. In some mountains there was a hut. The sister asked her brother when they would eat meat. The boy said that first he needed to cure the stranger, who turned out to be the main character. The magician was incredibly grateful to fate for such salvation. It turned out that Albert had been fighting a giant worm in the astral dimension for half a month and had finally won. The main character woke up and sat on the bed. He thanked the children with all his heart for their care. The children bowed down, as they believed, before the celestial being and begged him to take them as disciples. The hero did not see any potential in them and asked why they needed it. The brother and sister loudly declared that they just wanted to eat tasty meat every day. Albert was touched by their sincere honesty. The protagonist used the technique. First, they must pass the test of the spirit. The guy felt sorry for the kids, so even if they failed the test, he would provide them with a comfortable life. Unfortunately, the hero spent a lot of energy fighting the worm. Now he will have to recover for a long time. The magician promised himself not to leave the sect for the next 10 years. Also, you need to stay away from Nicholas to avoid getting into a similar situation. Albert decided to make more fighting dolls upon returning home. Suddenly, a mature man with a cane in his hands entered the hut. The man knelt before the great celestial being. The hero asked him to get up and offered to thank him for saving him. The stranger said that all he wanted was to live to a ripe old age with his beloved wife. The guy gave the man a bottle containing longevity pills. The man asked what was happening with the children. The hero replied that he was checking them before taking them to the sect, where they would be taken care of. The stranger left, and the hero took out the balls with the children's spiritual powers. In the boy's ball, he saw his brother looking after him until old age. The sister wanted to become a great warrior so that everyone would admire her. The hero admitted that after awakening, the children's lives would never be the same. At this time, Chris was sitting at the gate of Albert's hut. He was depressed. The guy blamed himself for what happened to the main character, because it was he who invited him to the wedding. Eva tried to cheer up her beloved and assured him that the magician was now alive and simply healing his wounds. Chris promised himself that he would wait for his friend at the gate until he showed up. The girl sat down next to her lover. They hoped for the best. Meanwhile, Albert arrived at the sect's foreign affairs office and persuaded the leader to make the children his disciples. After that, they rushed away on the ship. The brother asked if it was difficult to become like the hero. The magician said it was easy if they listened to him carefully. The boy had already begun to dream of a daily portion of meat for himself and his sister. The main character just laughed and offered them as much meat as they wanted in the future. Suddenly, Chris sensed a familiar spiritual aura. It was Albert. The guy immediately rushed to hug his friend. Chris looked at his brother and sister who had arrived with the hero. The guy thought they were the main character's children, but Eva immediately admitted that it was just nonsense. The magician hastened to calm his friend's imagination and called them his students. Albert didn't know the children's names, so he asked them to introduce themselves. The boy explained that they don't have them. They are given out for finding special plants named after them. In this situation, the main character came up with names for them. Now the girl was called Kate and her brother Kevin. The children were so grateful that they bowed before their new mentor. To begin with, Albert decided to dress up his students a little. 2 pink flying spheres merged with the children's clothes. Now the brother and sister had very beautiful and comfortable suits. Ava, standing nearby, was surprised by such a useful technique. The hero suggested that the girl try to use the magic ball herself. Eva applied it and ended up with a very revealing outfit. The main character begged her to change clothes, while Chris covered Kevin's eyes with his other hand. The other outfit was no better than the previous one. Now the girl had transformed into a semblance of a cat. Albert asked her to return it all back and try using it at home. After this awkward situation, Chris suggested celebrating the arrival of new students. The magician offered the children to try the meat dish. and they were simply delighted. When the kids walked away, Chris reached into his pocket. A moment later, he handed the hero a red envelope and asked him to accept it. A few days later, the main character went to the forge halls again. He had a bunch of orders. The old man walking behind him reproached the boy for fulfilling commercial orders when every blacksmith was important to the sect. Albert informed him of the situation that had happened on the way to the wedding and promised to help the other blacksmiths soon. The old man asked the boy to show his creation of the day. He unfolded a large box. The stranger lifted the lid and saw a very skillfully forged sword. The old man suggested that the hero leave the orders for now and instead go with him to repair the sect's ship. They jumped into the magic carriage and set off on their journey. Albert kept looking around, admiring the views of previously unknown territories. Suddenly, two scary dragons appeared next to the transport. The old man only laughed at the sight of fear on the hero's face. The animals were guarding the sect. The man also offered to ride them for only 10,000 spiritual stones. The guy politely declined. He had no desire to spend such a large sum on stupid entertainment. After some time, they finally reached the damaged ship. The old man explained the conditions of the work. For every square meter, the hero would receive 1,000 stones, and in addition, as a bonus, he would receive 20 new runes. The man advised him to watch the others work until the master arrived. Albert went to inspect the ship. Later, the master approached him and asked if the guy was ready for work. The hero already understood what was required of him. The master advised him to work at maximum speed. The main character melted metals and fused them into the stern of the ship. The master was delighted with how well and quickly the newcomer worked. After 2 months, the restoration of the ship's hull was finally completed. Albert asked the blacksmith if there was any more work for him, but the man replied that there was not. Thanks to the hero's skill, the work was completed a whole month ahead of schedule. The master predicted a great future for him. The man wanted to help the magician in this difficult task and extended his palm with 5 runes. The main character accepted the gift and promised to make for the master whatever he wanted. After the conversation, the hero decided to explore the place a little. The territory was too big, so the hero would have to come up with a way to get there himself. At this time, Chris and Eva were fighting wild animals far from the sect. The guy offered his wife to exchange the points for this task for an embryonic pill. He planned to send his future child to Albert as an apprentice. Suddenly, another pack of wild animals came towards them. There were 3 very strong enemies among the beasts. Chris and Eva could not retreat. The situation seemed hopeless. The guy would have to use the rescue ball that he acquired from the hero. He swung and threw it upward with all his might. The ball broke into small burning fragments. The animals did not understand what was happening. A moment later, there was a very powerful explosion, and nothing remained of the flock. The couple approached the crater left by the explosion. Chris felt ashamed that he had wasted such a valuable artifact to defeat stupid animals. Eva suggested that her beloved arrange a sparring match with the main character to hone his skills. Suddenly, the husband and wife noticed an unknown green glow at the bottom of the crater. It was a giant piece of iron ore enriched with spiritual energy. Chris once heard that it could be used to make armor that would protect against the strongest opponents. The guy threw Eva a bag of useful pills in battle and ran to mine ore. After some time, the couple came to Albert. As it turned out, he had recently moved. The hero presented his new development to his friends. It was the armor of God, made using enriched iron ore. Chris was amazed by their appearance. The hero suggested that he try them out. The guy didn't even have to do anything. The armor just stuck to him. Chris was able to rise into the air. Eva watched him with admiration. The guy was able to switch the suit to attack mode. He concentrated the energy in his palm and fired it at a nearby stone block. Chris was in awe of the power of this armor. The boy jumped onto the 1,000 tree and flew through the air like lightning. He congratulated Albert with all his heart for such a cool development. The hero thanked them for the ore they provided. The magician also said that he would soon go on an expedition on a sect ship, so he asked his friends to look after his students. The couple promised to look after them as if they were their own children. The main character prayed to fate that he would never meet Nicholas again. A month later, Albert was already heading to the place where the expedition was being prepared. The hero was delighted by the sight of this majestic ship. The magician, along with other passengers, proceeded on board the ship. To his regret, he heard a familiar voice behind him. It was Nicholas again. The guy hugged his old friend. The hero dreamed of leaving the ship as soon as possible. The young man asked a crew member to put Albert in the cabin next to his. In the evening, all the passengers were having dinner in the dining room. The main character planned to sneak off to the toilet unnoticed. Suddenly, as if out of thin air, Nicholas appeared. He praised the local food. His main goal was to win the hero's respect. Albert asked his friend how he dealt with his problem of losing strength. Nicholas claimed that his affliction simply disappeared as soon as he emerged from that portal 3 years ago. He also told how after this he returned to the girl with whom he had broken off the engagement. He beat up all her brothers, but she dealt with him with just one blow of her hand. The guy promised himself to become stronger in order to regain his lost honor. Drunk Nicholas rushed to hug the main character. He didn't like it very much. In fact, the guy went on an expedition to explore unknown runes that he noticed during repairs. Instead, he has to endure Nicholas's antics. Suddenly, the stranger put his hand on Albert's shoulder. The guy was shocked. Raising his head, he saw a mysterious man in front of him. An unknown person offered the main character to become his student. The man noted his strong spiritual energy. The guy became a little embarrassed. The stranger offered the hero to become part of the forging department. Albert thanked him for the offer, but stated that he was just an amateur and that he liked alchemy better. The man was angry at the lost talent and left. The hero waved after him. The magician did not want to join anyone in order to maintain his independence. Nicholas couldn't understand how his friend could refuse such a tempting offer. Albert was scared to death by his comrade who had sneaked up on him. Nicholas thought that the guy was lying about alchemy. The hero denied his speculations. The main character hid this so as not to attract unnecessary attention. After these words, the magician went for a walk along the deck of the ship. There, he saw a giant water snake jumping out of the ocean. Suddenly, he heard one of the passengers calling the snake the God Eater. The stranger turned out to be Claire. She was accompanied by an unknown guy. The girl introduced Albert to the guy, who turned out to be her older brother Richard. The guy looked as gorgeous as his beautiful sister. Suddenly, the hero grabbed his mouth. He could barely hold back his laughter. He rolled on his bed laughing because his brother's shortened name sounded like an obscene word. Having laughed his fill, the main character wiped away his tears and decided to apologize the next time they met. Albert jumped out of his bunk from the sudden jolt as the ship entered the waters of the endless sea. The guy went up on deck to explore previously unknown territories. He watched the artillery ships accompanying them. The hero dreamed of seeing them in action. Suddenly, Richard appeared. He too was delighted with the power of these weapons. The boy believed that their destinies were connected because they both abandoned alchemy for forging. Richard examined the runes that Albert was working on. The young man realized that the hero was planning to create a device for transmitting information over very long distances. Richard was amazed by his invention. He would never have thought of such a thing himself. Suddenly, a strange signal went off on the ship. A whole squad of people flew out on giant birds. They were called the Golden Patrol. Using hooks, they pulled a whale of enormous size out of the water. Albert watched their well-coordinated work with delight. The carcass of the animal was lifted into the air. Its meat was dangerous to people. The hero came up with the idea of creating his own navy in the future. But it seems his dreams are not destined to come true, because one shot from the cannon costs almost 100,000 spiritual stones. 3 days passed, during which time the magician came to the conclusion that the sect valued blacksmiths the most. The main character was called out by Richard, who told his mentor about his idea. The young man led Albert to the forge hall located on the ship. It was a gigantic room where work was in full swing. The guys walked to the mentor's office. The hero bowed to him. The old man praised the guy and said that this system could be developed and cover the entire continent with communications. The mentor offered the main character to become his student. The magician politely refused, arguing that he wanted to develop both forging and alchemy. After these words, the old man's gaze became truly eerie. A moment later, the teacher just laughed and noted the boy's sincerity. The old man mentioned that his offer still stood, but he would have to give up alchemy. The mentor gave the hero a special pass to access the inner sector. He will wait for him there. Albert sincerely thanked the old man for his understanding and left. After he left, Richard got down on one knee and asked his mentor for forgiveness for his friend's insolent behavior. The old man regretted that he would not be able to participate in the hero's development into a true master. Albert walked along the deck of the ship and thought about the old man's words. Besides, he had a dilemma. He couldn't decide between Claire and Lily. Suddenly, the ship's artillery sounded the alarm. The main ship was immediately covered with a special protective dome. Terrible sea monsters appeared right on the expedition's route. The enemy was fired upon with all available guns. After a while, the clouds dispersed and only the corpses of defeated monsters lay in the sea. The protagonist watched as the members of the Golden Patrol went in search of resources. Nicholas suddenly appeared out of nowhere and explained that such flocks usually guard something valuable. The young man apologized for his behavior. Last time he got drunk and passed out. The guy also said that many great warriors spend their last years at sea before their ascension, so their abodes can be found here. The hero thanked his friend for the useful information. He couldn't wait to loot a couple of them. Suddenly, An entire city appeared before Albert and Nicholas's eyes. The protagonist was surprised. The young man explained that it was just a divine relic found at the site of the victory over the sea creatures. Nicholas grabbed the magician by the hand and carried him straight to the magic city. Just after passing through the gate, the hero came across Claire waving sweetly at him. The girl greeted the hero. She did not expect to see him here. Suddenly, Richard interrupted the conversation and suggested that Albert rent a blacksmith shop for the two of them. Claire suggested practicing alchemy with ingredients raised from the bottom of the sea. The hero replied that he would rather go with the girl. Thomas suddenly appeared and interrupted their sweet conversation. Father ordered Claire to follow him immediately. Albert and the girl waved goodbye to each other. After some time, the hero and Richard were drinking tea and talking in their workshop. Suddenly, a girl appeared on the threshold and asked if they repaired alchemy cauldrons. She was quite attractive, so the protagonist, who knew a little about this craft, approached her. The girl made cute eyes and asked for help. She needed the boiler very soon. The guy examined the device and offered to pay 50 spiritual stones and some ore for its repair. When the girl gave him everything he needed, the hero got to work. He not only fixed the boiler but also strengthened it to give the beauty a small bonus. The magician handed the result of his hard work to the beautiful girl. She grabbed the pot and rushed away, even leaving behind some extra ore. After that, the guy spent a whole month sitting in the forge and fulfilling various orders. The guy told his friend that he had imagined the expedition a little differently. Richard understood his friend, so he suggested that they take a walk around the city. The main character, as if stung, hurried to jump onto the ship and set off to explore the sea. Surprisingly, almost the entire surface of the water was strewn with various monsters. After a long search, Albert found a safe place and decided to dive underwater. To do this, he took a tourist submarine and put an invisibility dome on it. Half an hour later, the hero dived to a depth of about 50,000 meters. His main goal was to try to find the treasure. Looking forward, the main character saw a terrible monster. It was a dolphin. Its eye was shining like a cyborg's. Meanwhile, Nicholas, who miraculously appeared nearby, tried to overcome the giant fish. The boy was talking to his mentor using a special technique. The man was a master in matters of swords. The monster's spine could be used to make an excellent weapon, so the mentor ordered the student to swim to his comrade to help. Nicholas didn't want to endanger Albert's life, so he turned around and took the blow from the fish. The mentor assured him to trust him. The guy had no choice. He headed towards the hero. At this time, the magician was busy collecting useful pearls from the bottom of the sea. He felt uncomfortable, and the main character had a bad feeling. He hurried to swim to the surface as quickly as possible, and a terrible roar sounded behind him. Through the submarine's porthole, Albert saw Nicholas. The boy was bleeding. The hero helped his friend get inside. The wounded Nicholas reported that the monster was almost defeated, but it needed to be finished off. After these words, the exhausted guy lost consciousness. The main character was furious at what he heard. His trip didn't go well at all. The fish rushed towards the boat, and an unknown glow shone above the vessel. It was Albert. He put on special armor so as not to take so many risks. The guy threw the harpoon with all his might into the monster's face. After that, he began to circle around the creature, who did not understand anything. The hero used a powerful technique. Hundreds of sharp spears rushed into the monster's body. Suddenly, the bloodthirsty fish disappeared from sight. The magician felt her behind his back. The monster turned out to be cunning. Albert threw several silver balls towards the creature. These were his fighting dolls, but they turned out to be unsuitable for underwater combat. The hero only planned to distract the monster and accumulate energy to create several clones. Meanwhile, the fish tried to fight off the attacking snakes. The magician finally gathered his strength and prepared for the final attack. The crystal he created shattered into a pile of fragments, and they began to approach the now helpless monster. Everything around was filled with a blue glow, and a strong whirlpool began to form. The sharp ends of the crystals pierced the fish's flesh like swords. Albert chuckled at his once powerful opponent. The current of the whirlpool was so strong that the fish was twisted and all its bones were broken. The hero took pity on his snakes. The victory cost him 80,000 spiritual stones. The swordmaster who watched the fight recognized the protagonist's talent. The magician returned to the ship and gave Nicholas the medicine. The guy who came to his senses asked for forgiveness for getting his friend into trouble again. Nicholas immediately rushed to the protagonist to make sure he was not seriously injured. Albert handed the young man a small bag containing what was left of the giant fish, and he looked at it thoughtfully. The hero made a cute face, and Nicholas offered him a magic ring that could hold a large amount of water. The guy reluctantly accepted such a valuable gift. He was embarrassed by his friend's excessive generosity. Suddenly, something gigantic appeared in the depths. It looked very much like a portal. A moment later, The submarine was transported to an empty field and the ship came to rest on the ground. The guys got out of their transport. Albert did not understand what was happening. His friend explained that they were transported to a very distant and hidden place. Nicholas looked at the wall of the nearby settlement. It looked long abandoned and empty. Suddenly, the main character reported bad news. With the help of his magical vision, he saw the impending threat. The magician, with a grin on his face, advised his comrade to quickly prepare for a fierce battle. Confused, Nicholas hurried to contact his mentor and find out what was going on around him. While the old man was explaining the current situation, predatory purple birds already appeared on the horizon. The huge flock was getting closer with every second, and the heroes needed to get out of there immediately. Albert and Nicholas managed to jump on board the magic ship, which the hero had shrunk with magic, and the predators rushed after them. The alchemist asked his friend for advice, but he was recovering his strength and nothing worked on him. After some time, the guy reported disappointing news. He would only be able to find a way out of here in 10 days. The main character put his hand on his friend's shoulder. He promised to protect him from all troubles during this time. Nicholas told about a small house of a swordsman nearby, and the ship headed there. The warrior commanded, and the talented magician happily carried out all his orders. In one of the rooms of the house, there was a large golden statue, graciously welcoming its guests. The boys paid absolutely no attention to the magical artifact. Instead, they took everything that might be useful to them in the future. Meanwhile, the flock of angry birds had almost reached this hut. Albert was incredibly happy, because they managed to take everything valuable before their approach. A few minutes later, the ship with the heroes on board broke through the wild statue. The magician noticed several strong birds, so he hurried to put on his armor. Nicholas was surprised to see it. The hero soared into the air and created several bird-like warriors around him. The guy was fully prepared for a quick, bloody clash with the pack. The old man who advised Nicholas noted Albert's outstanding fighting talent. One of the summoned warriors prepared a magic bow and pulled a powerful arrow. He was ready to attack at any second. A second later, he fired a shot, and everything around was illuminated with a blue glow. Nicholas could not believe in such effectiveness of simple dolls. He tried to support his friend. Suddenly, he asked Albert if he could create a puppet that was more powerful than these. The main character decided to play a joke on his friend. He offered him to buy one of these dolls for a very high price. Nicholas hastened to moderate his ardor. He had some minor financial problems. Despite all the efforts of the magician, the birds of prey did not want to leave the strangers alone. 5 days later, all of Albert's dolls were destroyed, and he fell to his knees near the corpses of the warriors. The hero regretted the money he had wasted, and Nicholas tried to cheer up his partner. The guy drank someone else's blood from his cheek. He needed to hold out for another 5 days. Suddenly, the main character rose from his knees and, filled with resentment and indignation, headed towards his enemies. Albert put his armor back on, his gaze wild, birds flying everywhere. The feathered creatures didn't even have time to realize that the guy had just used a powerful technique. Suddenly, the whole sky was illuminated by light coming from a bunch of powerful explosions. The birds had no chance to survive. Nicholas watched the battle with excitement. His mentor had only met such a capable warrior once in his long life. The boy wanted to meet another powerful fighter, and the old man promised that this would definitely happen in the future. Nicholas turned around, his face frozen in a grimace of obvious incomprehension. His mentor, Arthur, looked closely at his student. This warrior is the one whom the young man must avenge him. Their conversation was interrupted by Albert, his sudden, piercing cry piercing the air. Nicholas immediately turned towards him. He was very concerned about the main character's condition. The magician returned to the ship, and the cloud from the explosion still remained directly above him. The hero swore rudely at one of the birds. It turned out to be much stronger than the others. The feathered creature used a sonic attack. The guy grabbed his head. It was splitting with pain. Albert did not give up. He created a large and powerful weapon and did not doubt his superiority. The crosshairs of the sight were aimed precisely at the carcass of the giant bird. A second later, a shot rang out. A huge hole appeared in the monster's body, and he was defeated. The other birds looked at the falling corpse in surprise. They realized that they had chosen the wrong enemy. The protagonist wiped the blood from his face, a maniacal smile adorning his face. Albert decided not to stop and immediately called for help from several cannons. 5 days later, Nicholas had fully recovered, and the boys were rushing to board the submarine. Later, they returned to the city and went to a local cafe. The guy asked the magician to make a copy of the swordsman's legacy for him. The hero suggested that his friend take the original, since he was not at all interested in this area. The young man looked down. He didn't know how to thank the alchemist for such generosity. Albert asked Nicholas one question, the answer to which only an experienced warrior could know. The guy immediately agreed to fulfill his friend's request, even if he didn't know the answer. The protagonist asked if there was a 13th level of skill development. His comrade did not know the answer, so, returning to his room, he asked his mentor about it. The old swordsman demanded that he be shown respect. Then perhaps he would respond. Nicholas fell to his knees. After this, the mentor stated that everything depended only on the will of heaven. He told of ancient times the world was ruled by werewolves who did not allow people to develop their skills. The masters could not come to terms with the world order, so they began to look for a way around these rules. People could reach the 36th stage of development and higher. What he heard greatly surprised Nicholas. The old man warned the student that such advanced powers could bring the wrath of heaven. The guy realized that the 12th step is the limit, so as not to anger the gods. The student walked up to the window and wondered if he had the necessary abilities. He could travel back in time to bypass the restrictions. Meanwhile, Albert lay on the hammock. Despite the calm surrounding him, he was very worried. He was tormented by thoughts of the abandoned orphans and his unlucky friend Chris. 10 days later, a giant ship returned to the city from the expedition. All the students needed to get back on board, so soon dozens of silhouettes surrounded by magical auras appeared in the sky. Already on the ship, Richard met the hero and asked how he spent his free time. Albert asked if the expedition route was always different, and his interlocutor answered positively. According to him, with such weapons they are safe absolutely anywhere in the world. The alchemist dreamed of learning how such vessels were constructed. He was interested in their operation. Suddenly, Richard's expression changed and he rudely declared that the sect of blacksmiths who created this ship was very vile. The guy suddenly put his hand on the main character's shoulder and he was quite puzzled. Suddenly, he burst into a speech in which he expressed his sincere admiration for Albert's blacksmithing talents. Richard asked the magician to lead a sect of blacksmiths in the future and build a ship much better than this one. He also said that his mentor predicts a great future for the hero in 100 years. The alchemist made a strange face. He thought completely differently. Albert needed to change the subject immediately, so he asked about the development of his invention. According to Richard, only after the expedition is completed will they be able to begin practical use of the new means of communication. The main character was very proud of himself. In the future, almost the entire population of the sect would use his devices. The guy has already come up with a plan to monetize his idea. This will solve all his financial problems. Suddenly, a piece of land appeared in the distance. The friends interrupted their conversation and turned around. With the help of his magical vision, Albert saw a small building on the surface of what he believed to be an island. The magician turned to his comrade and asked what this place was, and he called it a turtle shell. Indeed, looking closely at the water, the hero noticed a giant amphibian in it. Richard grabbed his friend by the hand and hurried to treat him with the barnacles that were growing on the animal's carcass. After some time, the main character looked at the fried delicacy with bewilderment. Unexpectedly, Claire and a girl named Linda, who had asked for help fixing the boiler, joined the meal. The brother asked his sister where his father was. She replied that his favorite pot was broken and he was not in the mood. Upon hearing of his father's misfortune, Richard immediately set about creating a new one. The guy offered to give it to Thomas to cheer him up, and his sister happily agreed. Meanwhile, Albert thoughtfully watched the beautiful girls, his gaze directed at Claire. Linda kindly thanked the hero for his help. Her boiler became much better. The alchemist, enchanted by the girl's beauty, began to flirt with her, but she was not thrilled with what was happening. Claire hastened to moderate the guy's ardor. She explained that her friend was the daughter of the combat squad's mentor. After these words, Albert nervously swallowed another acorn. He had heard a lot about this formidable man. Suddenly, Linda lashed out at Claire, feeling ashamed at the mention of her father. The hero froze in anticipation, his gaze directed at the two charming girls sitting next to him. The alchemist's daughter winked slyly, realizing that Albert had apparently fallen in love. The guy decided not to approach this girl so as not to get into trouble and suddenly felt that Chris was in danger right now. At this time, a young man, dressed in the armor given to him by the hero, ran quickly. He was being chased by several werewolves. They looked like attractive girls. Suddenly, right before Chris's eyes, a half-naked lady appeared, beckoning the guy to her. He was taken aback for a moment, but then immediately came to his senses and did not succumb to the provocation. Unfortunately, this was enough for the werewolves to surround the poor young man. One of the girls wrapped a magic thread around the warrior, trapping him. The cute enemy approached the immobilized Chris. He was very embarrassed. Unfortunately, the boy was unable to escape, so the werewolves seduced him. Meanwhile, Albert looked thoughtfully into the distance. He considered it necessary to help his friend in a difficult situation. Still, He decided to do it when he returned home and turned to Linda, Richard, and Claire. 3 days later, Nicholas came to his friend late at night and told him everything he had managed to find out. The hero really wanted to sleep, but he managed to hear about the danger of the wrath of heaven. Albert laughed it off and said that he asked out of simple interest. Nicholas breathed a sigh of relief. In fact, the magician was lying. He planned to study this issue in detail after the expedition was completed. Suddenly, the young man grabbed the alchemist. He wanted to thank him for saving him, treating him to a drink in Barnacles. A month later, Albert finally returned home and was happily greeted by Kate and Kevin. The guy asked menacingly if the boy had been training in his absence, and the sister answered positively. The alchemist was very glad to see his hut again and breathed the familiar air. A little later, Chris and Eva came to visit to celebrate the hero's return. In the evening, tired from the day, Kevin collapsed on the bed and instantly fell asleep, with his sister lying next to him. Albert sat down next to him, looking lovingly at the sheltered orphans. Suddenly, he turned rudely to Chris and his wife. He realized that something was wrong with them. The guy licked his lips like a cat. His eyes changed. A werewolf possessed him. The protagonist was surprised to hear the proposal to make himself the main one on the continent. The guy didn't fall for the monster's tricks. He was angry because they were using the bodies of his friends. The beasts were no slouch and donned strong armor, preparing for battle. The magician grabbed Eva and looked into her soul. The werewolves had no chance to defeat the creator of the armor. Suddenly, Chris appeared from the side, the monster that had possessed him using an unknown spell. Albert instantly found himself in the middle of the courtyard of his house. There was no one around. Suddenly, he heard a very familiar voice behind him. He turned around in fear. A moment later, Lily jumped on the guy. The magician could not withstand the pressure and fell to the ground. The worried girl said that she had prepared a delicious dinner for her husband and something nice. The main character picked up the energetic Lily in his arms and carried her to the bedroom. The girl lay down on the bed and got ready. Suddenly, her eyes became like a cat's. The wife passionately embraced her beloved man, and animal whiskers appeared on her cheeks. Suddenly, the girl took on the appearance of Eva, and instead of Albert, a surprised Chris appeared above her. The werewolves were frightened by this unexpected development of events. Behind this absurd scene stood a hero. The guy used a special technique and pulled the souls of monsters out of his friends' bodies. Rescued. Chris rushed to his best friend. His wife burst into tears of joy. The guy was crying like a baby. The main character hurried to calm him down. The magician looked angrily at the werewolves. He promised to cause them even more suffering. After this, a snake appeared near the face of one of the animals and it took over his mind. Chris started to get nervous and asked his friend to just kill the monsters, looking suspiciously towards his wife. But it was too late. A second later, everyone in the room saw the werewolf's memory of how they seduced the guy. Eva was stunned by what she saw. Albert didn't know that everything was so serious. Chris began to justify himself in every possible way to his beloved. At this time, the hero sealed the souls of the werewolves in a ball. He gave the artifact to his friend so that he could get a reward for them. But he was not happy. A serious scandal was brewing at home. Meanwhile, something strange was happening in the werewolf lair. The animals gathered together. The supreme master of the heavenly throne sect scolded the monsters, his face flashing with disdain. The man looked into the magic crystal. He did not want the werewolves' attempts to revive their greatness to be in vain. A year later, Albert remembered the past. He had been in this world for 14 years already. The guy was standing again by his wooden model of the city, holding a new car in his hand. The hero missed his past life very much. His gaze was filled with grief. Going out into the courtyard, the alchemist discovered an uninvited guest, and goosebumps ran across his body. It turned out to be Nicholas. He turned to the guy with a request to help in the transition to the stage of the birth of the spirit. The main character was not particularly happy with him. He suffered only losses from his friend and constantly got into trouble. Nicholas put on a sweet face, and the boy turned to the best blacksmith he knew. The old swordsman ordered his student to be more persistent, but the young man did not like it. Suddenly, Albert stopped and turned around. His friend offered him a recently found ancient box as a reward. The blacksmith's face immediately changed and he agreed to fulfill the request. He needed to make 36 magic swords. The mentor sternly reprimanded Nicholas for throwing away such valuables. After the guy left, the main character noticed a strange boulder standing in the middle of the yard. It turned out to be Kate, using a camouflage technique, and the teacher grabbed the girl by her pigtails. The little student had long been learning the technique of transformation and even kept a diary. Albert was proud of her successes. Later, the hero approached Kate and asked her to come into the house. The girl brought tea and decided to ask how the hero managed to figure her out. The guy said that this comes with experience and advised the student to continue training. After this, Albert praised Kate's tea and broke into a satisfied smile. The girl said that she had found something interesting and handed the hero a package. Unrolling a piece of cloth, he saw a fragment of a willow branch that had been struck by lightning with a thunder rune imprinted on it. The alchemist lifted a piece of wood above himself and began to cast a spell diligently. He made a useful elixir from pieces of willow for Kate. She thanked the mentor for his care. Albert asked where Kevin was now. His sister replied that he had gone on a mission with Chris. Suddenly a voice was heard from behind, and the girl turned energetically towards its source. It was Chris and her brother who returned, the warrior holding a strange box in his hands. He put it on the table and removed the lid. According to him, there was valuable ore there. The main character froze in anticipation. Half an hour later, the orphans were fast asleep. Chris kindly covered them with a blanket. Albert demanded to immediately tell him where the boy found these valuable crystals. A week later, the hero was still studying the ore. It could store the consciousness embedded in it for a long time. He went out into the yard and came up with a wonderful idea. The magician would use crystals to infuse the battle dolls with a piece of his mind. The guy decided to test his new invention, so he prepared his fighting gorilla. Albert created a large white wolf with a horn on its forehead, its eyes shining with cruelty. The predator pounced on the doll, its entire mouth covered in razor-sharp fangs. The gorilla managed to put his club forward and block the enemy's blow. She pushed the wolf away. He fell to the ground without moving. The hero was very happy with his invention. At that very moment, Chris arrived, surprised by such a strange sight. The guy said that he brought everything necessary to repair the armor damaged by the werewolves. He also shared the good news that Chris had almost managed to make peace with Eva. Albert reminded that just 20 kilometers from here, there is the 100 Flower sect, inhabited by girls who rarely see men and want to seduce them to death. The alchemist strongly advised his friend not to approach that place under any circumstances. Chris didn't understand what this whole conversation was about if he wasn't going to go there anyway. The next day, the boy was given the task of going to the 100 Flower sect. A tear rolled down the warrior's face, which was very unexpected for him. The teacher ordered the boy to fulfill his request, because in that case they would be given a reward. Chris stared at the ground, remembering the protagonist's recent warnings. He threw himself at the feet of his mentor and asked to send another person, the image of an enraged Eve already appearing in his head. The man decided that he would be ashamed to send a student with such a beautiful face. He poked his finger into the guy's forehead and came up with a brilliant solution to the problem. Meanwhile, Albert and Nicholas were desperately trying to figure out how to save money when forging magic swords. The main character did not believe his friend's stories about his poverty. In fact, the guy had millions, but he constantly has to spend money on everything necessary for his mentor. Later, Nicholas went to a local pawn shop where he pawned a bag of his belongings. The old swordsman was unhappy with this state of affairs, and the student had no choice. At this time, Albert was finally able to remove the seal from the box given to him by his friend. He began to slowly lift the lid of the box, and a very bright beam of light came out from it. The magician's entire face was covered in a golden glow. He couldn't believe his eyes. Suddenly, Nicholas noticed that he had lost his jade ball, which served as a lantern. The protagonist was very upset at the sight of the useless jade ball. He angrily threw it out of his hands, realizing that he had been brazenly deceived. Later, Chris finally arrived at the 100 Flower sect, and guys and beautiful girls were having fun around him. Luckily, the mentor gave him an elixir of disfigurement. The guy promised to personally strangle himself if he cheated on Eve again. Next to the warrior sat mentor Ethan, holding a fan in his hands and deep in thought. Several female students of the sect immediately went to him and surrounded him with their attention. Opposite him sat a beautiful woman in a rather revealing outfit. She noticed that Chris's appearance had changed and blew him a kiss. The guy turned deeply red and his heart started beating wildly. Then the woman approached Ethan and tried to seduce him. If the man even looked at her, he might not return home. Chris noticed the stranger's curvaceous figure, and his nose started bleeding from excitement. A second later, a young girl sat nearby, and he began to feel even more embarrassed. The warrior was overcome with memories of what happened with the werewolves. He had to control himself. Meanwhile, Albert lay on a deck chair, admiring the sunset and reflecting on his failures. He created fire chicks, which were needed to awaken the spiritual fire, which would increase his forge rank. Suddenly, Nicholas's voice was heard, and the hero's heart almost jumped out of his chest from fear. The young man finally brought everything that was needed to make magic swords. The guy thanked the magician for helping him find resources, but he was not thrilled with Nicholas's company. At that moment, a friend whispered to Albert about a large deposit of ore that could enrich them. She was guarded by several strong monsters, but the main character already imagined himself bathing in gold. A strange phrase came out of the heated Nicholas's mouth. He considered himself and the magician to be ideally suited to each other. Albert did not want to share the ore, so he rejected his comrade's offer in every possible way. As a help, the hero offered the guy his new robot, capable of extracting minerals. The old swordsman ordered his apprentice not to stop and to shake out a few more useful things. Nicholas put on a sweet face and said that he would only feel safe in the presence of the protagonist. The magician promised to provide him with armor as well, and the friends parted ways with Albert regretting his comrade's arrival. At this time, Chris made every effort not to succumb to the charm of the girls around him. Suddenly, one of the students called out to him. The guy was holding on very steadfastly. Her face and figure were beautiful. She wanted to hug me goodbye. Chris firmly and decisively refused the girl, his face turning red. Despite this, the student still pounced on the guy and hugged him tightly. She kissed his neck, leaving a clearly visible lip imprint. Besides, Chris accidentally touched the girl's chest with the edge of his palm. The next moment, the guy's eyes flared with anger. He couldn't imagine how he would justify himself to his wife. Meanwhile, the residence of the Supreme Master of the Heavenly Throne sect was visited by an uninvited guest. It turned out to be a woman named Amelia, who was training Lily. The man treated her to tea, and she said that she wanted to allow the student to meet her husband. Albert couldn't believe his eyes when he saw not a little girl but a tall young woman. She turned around and struck the guy with her beauty. There was a sweet smile on her face. Lily threw herself into the arms of her beloved husband. The girl missed him very much. Kevin and Kate were quite surprised to see their mentor's wife flying in on a divine bird. Drooling, the wife suggested that the main character go with her and even have children. Albert didn't want anything like that at all, so he began to deny it and look for various excuses. Later, the guy introduced Lily to orphans who were like children to him. The girl was delighted and broke into a happy smile when Kevin called her mother. Lily handed the children one bottle each, and they were delighted with what was happening. Soon, a magic bird appeared on the horizon, and the student said goodbye to the hero and the orphans. Suddenly, Albert called out to her. She stopped abruptly and turned around. The guy approached the girl and put a ring on her finger. The couple looked at each other carefully. Now they had become real husband and wife. Lily looked at the parting gift. She said that she would always miss the hero. The magician smiled and answered the same. He was finally happy. A few moments later, Albert stood alone, watching the bird disappear into the distance. Amelia couldn't understand what her student saw in this loser. Lily loudly flared up at her mentor. She considered the hero the best guy in the world. After these words, the girl happily plunged into the memories of their first meeting. Meanwhile, the protagonist told the orphans about their gifts, which were pills based on phoenix blood that help in case of critical injury. After learning that the mentor had nothing of the sort, Kate and Kevin offered to take them with him, but he politely refused. He looked thoughtfully at the sky, remembering his beloved wife. A little later, the guy went to the forge. He wanted to create a device that would control the minds of battle dolls. He suddenly stopped, feeling the presence of a stranger next to him. The hero went out into the yard to meet the stranger, but was very surprised. It turned out to be Chris. The guy showed the lipstick mark left by the disciple of the 100 Flowers sect and explained the situation. To appease his friend, he brought an incomprehensible thing bought at the fair. Chris was overjoyed when he heard that Albert would help him. The hero looked closely at the lip print. He needed to find a solution to the problem as soon as possible. The magician reported disappointing news. This trace had already merged with Chris's soul, and it could only be removed if he moved to the stage of the birth of the spirit. Suddenly, the main character took a sharp blade in his hands and smiled evilly. His comrade became very nervous. Albert swung at him, and the boy stepped aside in fear. The blow was so strong that Chris, letting out a shrill scream, flew back several meters. Suddenly, he felt excruciating pain and blood began to flow from his neck. The protagonist almost instantly shoved the pill given to him by Lily into his friend's mouth. In the mirror, Chris saw a fairly large scar in place of the lip imprint. Albert took him by the hand and calmed his friend, assuring him that he would disappear as soon as the boy moved to a new stage of development. That evening, Nicholas tried to escape to the Valley of the Large Tusked Elephants, where the valuable ore was located. He was chased by giant animals and tried his best to survive. Suddenly, the young man saw an energy field emitted by the portal ahead. Nicholas, without thinking, touched it to avoid death in this nasty place. A moment later, Kate and Kevin, who were playing in the yard, noticed a glow in the sky that looked like a shooting star. The children rushed to wake up the sleeping Albert to tell him about the unusual find. The sister offered the mentor to drink an elixir of vivacity, which she found in a nearby lake. Kevin reported that he felt the presence of dangerous monsters there. The hero became very nervous. He began to ask the children what they would do if they encountered a dangerous enemy. The children handed the teacher a scroll on which a clear plan of action was written. Albert stroked Kate's head sweetly. He was ready to trust their plan. 3 days later, all three reached the lake in their flying ship. The protagonist carefully examined the perimeter. The brother caught his sister, who jumped from the ship. Kevin explained that he discovered the place when he was trying to catch a small white fox, and there was a mysterious man standing behind him. He held this tiny animal in his hands. It looked a little scared. The man kindly gave the fox to Albert, who noticed a strange aura in it. The animal called the hero names, so he let the children take it. Kate was overjoyed. The fox was acting aggressively and almost bit the boy. The main character placed his students in a magic bubble. It was time for them to go to the portal. A moment later, all 4 of them dived to the bottom of the lake. The children were having fun. At the bottom, they came across a large closed gate. Kate took a mysterious crystal out of her pocket. There was a mysterious mechanism on the door. The girl placed all 6 crystals in the appropriate recesses. After this, the gates opened loudly, and the heroes saw a large hidden world behind them. The main character took out his new invention for controlling the minds of dolls. He planned to test it. He sent several of them to extract useful resources, while the rest were ordered to clear the area of monsters. In addition, the magician used the vessel for draining the seas to absorb water from the lake. A ship remained on the shore, and a funnel formed in the center of the reservoir. Suddenly, the children turned around and noticed a scary, unfamiliar creature. In the middle of the clearing stood a bunch of angry animals, their eyes burning with rage. Albert asked his student to name the most deadly technique he knew. The boy called her name. The hero folded his hands in a magical gesture. With this, he summoned a huge jet gun. The magician pointed his finger at the angry animals, lightning flashing in his eyes. A moment later, the sound of a shot was heard, and the place where the animals stood was enveloped in a cloud of smoke. The children were once again convinced of the undeniable fighting talent of their mentor. Kevin suggested going in search of a stronger opponent. Albert hit him in the forehead with his finger because he did not want to take an ill-considered risk. Suddenly, the hero's device reported that the dolls were unable to cope with one of the creatures that was heading straight here. The 3 of them turned around, hearing a piercing, frightening sound nearby. A giant monster, resembling a panther in appearance, appeared from the thicket of the forest. The children began to tremble, noticing the sinister gaze of this creature. Fortunately, they pulled themselves together and prepared to fight off the intruder. The main character was very happy with the bravery of his students. Despite this, he stood in front of the twins so as not to endanger them and fired several magic arrows. The boy advised the children to watch him closely in order to gain useful experience. The beast immediately rushed towards the hero, its sharp fangs inspiring fear. The arrows hit the ground, and the shockwave sent the panther flying back several meters. The animal let out a loud roar. It was not going to give up so easily. Suddenly, the monster's body changed dramatically, and giant wings grew on its back. Albert did not expect the battle to develop this way, but he still remained calm. Even more sharp arrows rushed towards the enraged beast. A few seconds later, the monster fell to the ground, a pool of blood forming near its head. The protagonist explained to his students that even an enemy who seems defeated must be finished off. The soul of the panther flew out of the lifeless carcass and was immediately sucked into the magic vessel. The magician rejoiced at his latest victory. The orphans played with the carcass of the defeated beast. Meanwhile, an unknown guy was killing monsters in the werewolf world. It turned out to be Nicholas, disguised as the young prince of the wolves. The young man had long wanted to return home, but the old swordsman insisted otherwise. He also said that they needed a lot more resources because in the future, the guy would need 10,000 swords. Nicholas immediately imagined himself surrounded by a bunch of blades. He could become the greatest warrior. But he quickly became upset when he remembered the enormous number of artifacts required. The old man promised to take the student to his hiding place in the future, the supplies of which would be enough to cover the expenses. Nicholas was very happy to receive this news from his mentor. Suddenly, a huge hand reached out from the sky and approached the guy. The palm grabbed the young man, and the swordsman had to leave him. A few moments later, Nicholas saw a certain entity in front of him. She offered the guy to become her student. 10 years passed after these events. Albert remembered the old days. During this time, Chris and Eva had a son named Jack, who grew up and became the hero's apprentice. Growing up, Kate brought her mentor some treats and asked why he was so sad. The boy was tormented by the thought that even in 100 years he would not reach the second stage of development. The girl handed him a treat on a stick and encouraged the teacher. She considered him the strongest in the world. The main character was happy about this. A little later, Albert's best friend Chris decided to visit him. When the children left, the guy's face seemed to change. A serious conversation was brewing. Suddenly, the warrior made a cute face and asked the hero to take his friend's son as an apprentice. The magician concentrated. According to his observations, no one from Chris's circle had children of the appropriate age. The guy felt ashamed, covered his face with his hands, and began his story. 7 years ago, a warrior and disciple from the Thousand Cloud sect went on a mission where they encountered a magical snake. Before dying, the monster released a poison on them that increased passion in living beings. Chris and his partner desperately resisted the effects of the poison. However, the souls of the boy and girl had intercourse, creating a child. Albert thought it would be foolish to abandon such a special student. The warrior sadly reported that the child's mother had died upon returning to her sect. The main character believed this amazing story and ordered to immediately introduce him to the boy. It turned out that he was sitting under a tree standing right next to the magician's house. The child's name was Henry. He was 6 years old, and he was distinguished by his intelligence. The boy happily agreed to become Albert's student and smiled broadly. The child was possessed by the desire to find his father and make him repent for the death of his mother. The main character and his friend exchanged nervous glances. Their secret must remain a closely guarded secret. The alchemist led Henry into the room where he had to pass the entrance test. After using a special technique, the boy fell into a deep sleep. Meanwhile, several horned wolves emerged from one of the portals. A large bear, who was their commander, appeared behind them. He looked around angrily. A huge scar adorned his forehead. With the help of his hawk, he realized that he was in the human world. Smiling, the commander considered it necessary to inform his fellow werewolves about this discovery. At this time, Nicholas sat quietly and obediently listened to the lecture. The mysterious entity turned out to be a powerful mentor. He taught the boy for a long time. After a few days, the main character finally managed to make his own sniper rifle. Suddenly, frightened orphans ran into the room. Kevin reported the approach of an army of werewolves. According to him, the animals kill all people in their path. Albert could not believe his ears. The boy looked at his students. He really didn't want to send them to war with monsters. The alchemist placed his hand on the table and ordered the orphans to begin training immediately. Before this, Kate and Kevin needed to buy the necessary ingredients and animal souls. The children had no doubts about the correctness of their mentor's decisions. War was brewing. 3 days later, the hero showed his brother and sister the Hall of Illusions, where time passed differently than in the real world. He also gave them special pills to help avoid side effects. The children will have to spend 1 month here. From time to time, Albert visited his pupils. By this time, the situation in the world had become tense, and more monsters were breaking through the portal. The rulers of many countries decided to help people and destroy the magical teleportation field forever. But one of the world's strongest swordsmen had already done so, killing 2 generals before disappearing without a trace. The werewolves retreated, but promised to remove the seal, holding back the powerful monsters if people entered the forbidden area. It was a territory surrounded by a protective sphere, where warriors were constantly on duty. After a while, Kevin demonstrated what he learned in the Hall of Illusions. The hero explained the situation in the world to the children, and suddenly he received a message. It was from Richard, who had persuaded his mentor to take Albert to the front lines. The guy wasn't particularly happy about this news. He didn't want to risk his life in the war. Richard reported that the best blacksmiths were gathering at the front line. This was the best opportunity to demonstrate their skills. The next morning, they set out on their journey, taking the orphans with them, who encouraged their teacher. Kevin called Albert over and pointed into the distance. The main character saw the restricted area and found it quite safe. Richard put his hand on the mage's shoulder and told him the bad news. The werewolves had received the coordinates they needed. According to him, this meant that monsters could enter the human world by paying a certain amount. All this is due to the fact that the monsters were the masters of this world, and therefore have every right to be here. In ancient times, werewolves wanted to unite their world and the earthly world. But, unfortunately for them, this process was hindered by people. They rebelled against the enslavers. Richard explained that the merger was almost complete, so monsters and humans could invade each other with impunity. Suddenly, right under the ship, several werewolves appeared, breaking through the barrier. They were noticed by Kate and Kevin. The children were very scared when they saw such monsters. Horrible monsters appeared from all sides, drooling from their mouths. Suddenly, they were enveloped in a yellow glow and the air smelled of gunpowder. It was a ship's cannon that fired. Albert and his students watched the crater that formed where the werewolves stood. The hero advised Kevin to train even harder to master a technique equal in power to this shot. Suddenly, a stranger called out to the magician and offered to do a small job for him. The man looked very strong and tall. He asked the guy to fix the broken armor. A moment later, the brute put his hand on his shoulder and led him into the forge. The armor was in terrible condition. Albert was not sure that he could handle repairing it. Luckily, the guy found a way out and asked the customer to bring some ingredients. The man could not believe that such an undeveloped person could help him. The main character, noticing this, demonstratively refused the order and headed for the exit. The brute hastened to stop him and promised to bring the necessary materials. A few hours later, Albert and his students completed their temporary home. Suddenly, a portal opened behind the hero. A hand reached out and grabbed him. It was the same man again. He had obtained everything he needed and was preparing to help the blacksmith. The guy took the crystal ore in his hands. The brute ensured the maintenance of the spiritual fire. The work was in full swing. The hero had time to get to know the man better. His name was Isaac. He told a little about himself and said that Richard's mentor advised him to turn to the magician. Moreover, if the job is done perfectly, he will reward the protagonist with a piece of meteorite ore. Albert was extremely happy to hear this. Such a valuable metal was very difficult to find. After a few hours, the work was completed and the armor looked like new. The blacksmith suggested equipping them with magical abilities for greater efficiency. Isaac quickly grabbed his box, which contained the treasures of the ice element. The guy rummaged through it and chose a magical artifact in the form of a dragon. The brute immediately boasted that he personally killed this huge monster. The man doused the armor with spiritual fire. A long and difficult process lay ahead. Using a brush and bone powder, Albert applied several runes. With the next movement, he took the artifact in his hands and prepared to put it into the armor. Suddenly, a ghost of a giant dragon appeared in the forge, wanting to break out. The monster's soul was so huge that all the warriors nearby could see it. After finishing the work, Isaac brought a bag with the promised ore and a reward of 200,000 spiritual stones. But he found the main character falling asleep right at his workplace. A little later, the brute went to test the armor by challenging the bear to a fight. A beast of monstrous size loomed over the man, looking aggressively at the man. Isaac prepared for a brutal battle. He planned to kill the monster or die himself. A moment later, they were locked in a bloody fight. The next day, a clash occurred between the people and the horde of monsters. A huge earthworm tried to swallow one of the warriors. A second later, an equally large hole appeared in his mouth. The fighters were covered by Kate, who was positioned on a nearby cliff using a sniper rifle. Several giant birds of prey became visible in her sight. With one precise shot, the girl pierced the head of the feathered creature. She enjoyed the fact that she could defeat the enemy at such an impressive distance. Kevin appeared on the battlefield. One of the warriors ordered the boy to immediately return to the safe zone. But the little fighter did not listen to him. He prepared for his new attack. A column of a substance resembling hot lava fell from the sky onto the heads of the monsters. The monsters' bodies were destroyed, but their souls remained intact. Kevin used another powerful technique and finished off the remaining life force of the creatures. The huge bird began to create an energy ball and aimed at the boy. Fortunately, he noticed the impending threat in time and managed to deftly avoid the attack. One of the birds managed to get close to the guy. It stood behind his back. Suddenly, there was a shot, and a bullet pierced the feathered creature's head. The boy's sister boasted of her powerful and useful weapon. Kevin was no slouch. He took one ball out of the bracelet Albert had given him and started casting a spell. The whole sky was illuminated with a bright light, and birds began to fall to the ground. Isaac and his friend watched the progress of the battle from the watchtower. The brute was very concerned about why the guest had come to the front line. The young man explained that he only wanted to find the person who forged the man's armor. Isaac threw up his hands. In his opinion, the guy had no need to look for a blacksmith. Besides, he didn't want to share such a talented master with his, apparently, rival. But upon hearing about a girl named Lucy, the thug's face changed dramatically. He immediately agreed to help the young man and bring Albert. The guy said that Lucy wanted to go on a trip, but she didn't have a companion. Isaac immediately ran to look for the main character and get tickets. Meanwhile, Albert was at his temporary home. Even here, he could smell the blood coming from the battlefield. Arriving at the site of the recent battle, he saw several corpses of monsters and a huge scarlet spot on the ground. Suddenly, the boy discovered his little students and was very surprised. The children greeted their mentor and studied the giant egg. The girl desperately wanted to know who would hatch from it. Albert thought it was too dangerous and suggested just making an omelet. Kevin agreed. Suddenly, Kate said about the hollow bone, which is a storage place for werewolves. The teacher was delighted. He remembered that werewolves had useful runes, so he ordered the orphans to thoroughly search each dead person. Suddenly, the guy received an invitation from Richard. Construction of a giant cannon would soon begin. Later, the main character reached the indicated place. His friend looked surprised. All those gathered were met by the best blacksmith master on the continent, whose name was Edgar. His assistant removed the cloth and presented the powerful weapon to the guests. Albert was not impressed at all. His techniques could easily surpass the cannon in power. The master said that he and his students would soon begin equipping the weapon with runes. Several people standing near him were surrounded by a magical aura. A moment later, it enveloped the cannon itself. Everyone around, even the main character, was impressed by Edgar's abilities. Soon the work was completed, and the mighty weapon was surrounded by a protective barrier for safety. The hero had a wonderful idea to equip himself with a bunch of different weapons. Richard reported that they would start making another cannon right now. Albert decided to take a walk. In the evening, the guy was walking along one of the streets and noticed a very strange scene. Right next to him, several beautiful girls were trying to seduce men. Suddenly, he noticed Kevin. Two ladies were trying to drag him away. The boy broke free and harshly scolded the girls. He considered them an obstacle on his path to becoming a great warrior. The angry guy walked away. The main character lurked nearby. He suddenly jumped out and gave his student a powerful flick. Albert looked angrily at Kevin. He didn't understand what such a little boy could be doing in an adult neighborhood. The boy explained that two women grabbed him and tried to drag him to an unknown place. Kevin immediately flared up and demanded that the strangers leave him alone. After that, the guy challenged them to a fight. He had 48 fights and did not lose a single one, which he was very proud of. The next day, the hero passed by the area again and noticed two excited girls. On one of the walls, the magician noticed a poster depicting his student, who was declared a crazy fighter. Albert immediately hurried to get to the hut where the orphans were now. He ordered Kevin to put on a special mask and not take it off until he left. The situation with the boy distracted the hero from searching for runes, but he found time to do it. Suddenly, he saw his old friend Dylan. He was not looking his best. When the fat man noticed the guy, he immediately burst into tears of joy. Dylan fell to the ground and burst into tears. His first venture a complete failure. The hero was not interested in business. He simply went on with his business. Suddenly, an idea came to him. The alchemist stopped and offered his friend help. The fat man promised the guy a portion of the money he earned as a reward. The main character suggested to the hapless entrepreneur to build a network of communication towers along the entire front line. After that, he raised the spiritual stone into the air. That's how much the devices needed to implement the plan would cost. The magician used magic, and a device resembling a modern smartphone appeared in front of Dylan's face. The fat man was greatly encouraged and promised to use his friend's idea. The businessman was torn apart by the thought of future wealth. For such an invention, he would reward the hero with 10 million. A moment later, Dylan curled into a circle and hurried away from Albert. The main character was confused when he saw such a strange technique of movement. Meanwhile, Nicholas continued his diligent training in the werewolf world. Suddenly, he angrily punched his leg, the guy blaming himself for starting the war between people and werewolves. The old swordsman advised the student to stop thinking about it and instead focus on training. Nicholas was very worried about his friends. The old man calmed the guy down. According to him, werewolves cannot harm the human world in any way. The teacher warned about the imminent beginning of the War of the Worlds. The young man wanted to know who would be the winner. Most of the human warriors are blessed by the heavenly will, so they have superiority. Suddenly, the swordsman pointed at Nicholas, calling him humanity's last hope in case of defeat. The guy stared at the ground. He felt he had to continue training. At this time, Chris brought the main character a bag with useful runic artifacts. Albert couldn't understand how such a loser could always be lucky. The magician opened the package and could not believe his eyes. His mouth opened wide in surprise. The bag contained a light-bearing stone that possessed the runes of the sun and moon, which allowed it to give the ability to control time. Chris offered to take the artifact from his friend, who agreed, crying joyfully. The warrior did not know what to do with such a valuable find, so he could not find a better solution than to give it to the main character. Chris traded the good weapons and armor he could get from the blacksmiths for his friend's smile. The boys shook hands, showing their loyalty to each other. The warrior looked kindly at Albert and asked him to swear that they would remain as brothers forever. After this, the friends said goodbye, and Chris flew away on his flying sword. The next moment, the hero again looked closely at the stone he had received. The guy felt uncomfortable remembering that his own students were developing much faster than he was. The magician was tormented by the thought that even after 100 years he would not achieve any success at all. Albert took a small piece of paper out of his pocket. On it was a plan for creating a time room. Then, using magic, he began to combine the light-bearing stone and the scroll. Solar and lunar runes separated from the useful artifact. After a few seconds, they surrounded the piece of paper and began to merge with it. The protagonist smiled. He planned to create a time room and train there for many years, while only a moment would pass in the real world. After that, the guy opened the door. He was filled with motivation. Soon the hero and his students returned home, and for 5 months, he tried unsuccessfully to fulfill his plan. The blacksmith decided to use spatial time grains of sand. Unfortunately, according to mathematical calculations, this requires 10 million spiritual stones. Albert swept everything off the table with his hands. He admitted that he needed to get 120 million. Moreover, sand grains are mined in space, so the hero needs serious connections. The main character came to a disappointing conclusion. He will have to sell most of his property. Albert walked out of his room into the yard and yawned widely. There, Kate and Henry learned a spell to summon magical butterflies. The girl asked her friend to show the teacher his signature move. He folded his hands in a special gesture, and a second later, figures of birds and dragons appeared in the sky. This is how the boy imagined the world of the Celestials. In his opinion, golden flying lizards and phoenixes lived there. A moment later, Henry continued to show off his skills. He crossed his fingers and disappeared. The protagonist praised the student while admitting that he was a worthless mentor. Albert decided to test the boy, so he got out a special remote control. A few seconds later, a strong wind swept through everything around, and Kate smiled contentedly. After this, a powerful downpour began to pour from the sky, and the girl took cover with a homemade umbrella. Then tall green grass began to grow quickly from the ground. The hero praised Henry for his ability to blend into his surroundings. The boy dispelled his technique, and it appeared right above Kate's head. The girl was furious at this turn of events, and the little student promised never to do it again. Suddenly, the main character created an illusion of a giant, angry tiger around himself. Henry immediately crossed his palms and formed a projection of a small white rabbit. The predator approached and looked in surprise at the cute little animal, who was trembling violently with fear. The tiger opened its mouth wide, lined with razor-sharp fangs. A moment later, Albert called for rain, and the hungry beast chased after the little rabbit. Henry was desperate to find a way to help his animal. A little later, the boy fell down exhausted, and the mentor praised him for his efforts. The student expressed a love for using illusions, as they could help him create a world in which his mother was still alive. The main character's face changed. He could not tell the truth about the boy's parents. Immediately after that, the boy hugged little Henry. Now they were his family. The student pressed himself against Albert. He was glad to feel almost paternal love. A little later, the hero brought the boy to the training hall and offered to choose several scrolls with spells. He decided to choose dark techniques. It didn't suit his cute face at all. The protagonist acknowledged that Henry was as smart as he was. The boy left the room with the scrolls. Jack hid in the shadows and looked angrily at his comrade. Chris and Eva's biological son complained to his mentor that he also wanted to learn powerful spells. A little later, the young guy began training in the Hall of Illusions. Albert transported Jack into an illusion where he was surrounded by several wild cats. Their eyes glowed red, and terrible fangs protruded from their mouths. The next moment, they simultaneously pounced on the guy. Jack pulled his sharp sword from its sheath, his gaze radiating confidence. After a couple of seconds, the young man surrounded himself with a sphere emitting lightning. With his next move, the boy created a wind sword and sent it into the sky. Right above the battlefield, the thunder and wind swords crossed, and the air was filled with tension. A moment later, Jack pierced his opponents with his blades. The protagonist praised the student because the werewolves were much higher than him in terms of strength. Chris's son was embarrassed and said the test was too easy because he was prepared for it. Then Albert made things more difficult for his protege by creating 10 monsters at the foundation stage. The magician advised the boy to step back and just watch the battle. At that very second, the mentor seemed to evaporate into thin air. Weak gusts of wind began to blow across the faces of the wild werewolves. A second later, the main character appeared on one of the stones, and lightning struck the birds of prey. The teacher drew Jack's attention to a small stream of wind that was relaxing the enemies. But the boy did not listen to him. He was already immersed in the process of meditation. Albert walked out of the hut and yawned widely. Suddenly, he was struck by thoughts of Nicholas, who he had not heard from for a long time. Meanwhile, this young man was in a bathhouse located in the territory of the werewolf world. He was surrounded by monsters that took the form of beautiful girls. The old swordsman recommended his student to continue searching for useful resources. The guy got up from the bath and said that in 50 years he would definitely return to the human world. Half a century passed. The main character grew old, and a mustache adorned his face. Little Henry was very worried because he thought that his mentor would soon die. Later, Kate, Kevin, and Jack arrived, and together they begged their teacher to drink the rejuvenating elixir. The hero refused, arguing that with age all his progress would disappear. The children looked at Albert sadly. The girl began to cry and clung to her brother. During all this time, the little students went through a long and difficult path together with their mentor. Kevin burst into tears. The protagonist reassured his charges by saying that he just wanted to make a perfect breakthrough and was not going to die. The children screamed hysterically, demanding that the teacher drink the elixir. Suddenly, a magic thread wrapped around the hero, and he was very surprised. It was a spell from a sobbing Kate. She was not going to risk the guy's life. Albert was upset. It was useless to explain to the children his true motives for growing old. The next moment, the crying girl pushed the mentor to the ground and apologized for what she would have to do. The protagonist began to desperately tell her about his true plans. Kate wasn't listening to him at all. She had already brought the bottle of elixir to the teacher's lips. The children watched intently as a single drop flew into the hero's mouth. Suddenly, a huge wooden hand grabbed the girl by the pigtail. These were the magician's battle dolls, and the student tried unsuccessfully to escape from their clutches. Albert explained to his students that if he could not break through to the next stage within a month, he would voluntarily drink the elixir. After this, the old mentor looked at the children with fatherly eyes. They looked guilty. Kevin shed a sad tear. A month later, the students agreed to break into the hall and forcibly pour a potion on the teacher if any misfortune occurred. Meanwhile, the protagonist sat quietly in the training room, waiting to make a final attempt to break through. There was only half an hour left. The guy hoped that the children wouldn't burst in at the most inopportune moment. At the same time, Nicholas came to the portal through which he entered the world of werewolves many years ago. The young man was burning with impatience, wanting to get home as soon as possible. The old swordsman offered him to stay and continue training, but he refused. Nicholas wanted to return to his parents, meet Albert and other friends again. The mentor did not contradict the guy. Instead, he created a field for teleportation to the human world. Meanwhile, the hero's students observed a strange picture. Magical clouds formed right above the hut. The magician had already begun the breakthrough process, and a magical aura was emanating from him. The guy was transported to a place that looked very much like deep space. A few minutes later, the children knelt down to greet their mentor. Albert looked young and fresh. He was finally able to make the long-awaited breakthrough. He happily reported that the children's fears were unfounded. Suddenly, the hero experienced a strange feeling. It predicted the approach of a bloody battle. The entire sky was filled with warships, warning of an imminent attack by werewolves. The protagonist ordered his students to immediately prepare for evacuation. By that time, Chris and Eva were already rushing to their aid. Albert and the children jumped into the aircraft and quickly got out of there. Meanwhile, Nicholas returned to the human world and found a strange tripod artifact. The old man said that he needed to leave immediately. Suddenly, the werewolf who trained him loomed over the guy and offered to destroy the entire continent. The monster grabbed the young man and wanted to make him the ruler of this world. Suddenly, that artifact fell from above, and the werewolf was distracted by it. This allowed Nicholas to move away from his guest. In a fit of anger, the monster destroyed the tripod. It was angry. The werewolf ordered his warriors to immediately go to the forbidden area to unite with the other monsters. A few minutes later, the entity used deadly technology, and a powerful explosion thundered in the city of people. A little later, the leader of the sect appeared in the sky. He prepared for a tough fight. His face was filled with rage. His whole body was enveloped in golden lightning. The man rushed towards the enemy, covered from behind by the ship's guns. Nicholas watched all this, very upset. The guy moved to the shores of the endless sea. He blamed the mentor for not warning him about the danger of that entity. The old man did not tell everything, because the student's hot temper would have led to his death. Suddenly, Nicholas noticed an elderly man and a girl accompanying him in front of him. The old man invited the young man to join their sect of royal swordsmen. Meanwhile, Chris and Eve were already at the portal between the countries. Everyone around was discussing the fall of the Heavenly Throne sect. Albert asked his friends to remain calm despite the current situation. He invited the husband and wife to go to the neighboring country with him and his disciples. Chris and Eva kindly thanked the protagonist for his generosity. Later, they all got to the transfer point together. Kate was scared. Unfortunately, there was a huge queue in front of them. They would have to wait a long time. Suddenly, someone put his hand right on the hero's shoulder and he became scared. It turned out to be an old friend, Isaac, who greeted the blacksmith in a friendly manner. The brute was heading in the same direction as the heroes, so he offered to join them. Albert agreed, and the crowd, seeing such a giant, immediately parted. Henry couldn't believe that his mentor was friends with such mighty warriors. Isaac hoped to help and receive a favor from the protagonist in return. A moment later, they all entered the portal that had opened. The magician stood with his mouth open in surprise. He couldn't believe his eyes. Before him appeared a huge capital, striking in its beauty. A little later, the squad reached a temporary shelter. Albert finally felt safe. The guy decided to settle into his new place and create an army of fighting dolls to protect himself from werewolves. A restless Kevin asked what they were going to do now. The children suggested that the hero found his own sect, and he was very surprised. Albert imagined this development for a moment. The boy suggested calling it the Steel Door Section. The protagonist approached Kevin and admitted that he always considered him stupid. Despite this, the guy was inspired by the idea of creating his own sect. A few days later, the hero and Isaac parted ways. He needed to forge divine items, but he couldn't yet. The brute promised to wait for his next breakthrough to ask for help again. They agreed to meet in 50 years and shook hands. A moment later, the man flew away. The main character wished him good luck on his way. The teacher told Kate that after lunch, they would go to look for a place to create a cult. Albert noticed the presence of an unusual spiritual aura in the air, which he had never encountered at home. Kevin was burning with impatience and suggested taking a walk around the city. Later, the magician noticed cloud islands floating in the sky. Unexpectedly, they met two guys on their way, offering to join one of their sects. They glared at each other, not wanting to let go of a potential participant. Suddenly, Henry stepped forward and enveloped his opponents in his enchanting spell. A moment later, the heroes moved forward, leaving behind the hugging guys. A little later, a local resident approached Albert and offered him a scroll containing all the basic information about the city. The main character took it and absorbed all the information. It turned out that his invention was widespread here. In addition, the flying islands served as communication stations. The Council of Elders of the Central Continent was in charge of everything here. Only they could allow the creation of a sect. The hero put a map on the table and advised the students to study it carefully. Suddenly, Kevin jumped up and pointed his finger at one place. On one of the islands, there was a large forest. There was a city nearby, and what's more, there were no other sects there. Kate whispered to her brother that if no organization had occupied the island, there must be a reason for it. Albert looked carefully at the map. He needed to check this place personally. Suddenly, the hero laid out a pile of money in front of the owner of the establishment. In return, he asked to explain why there was not a single sect near the neighboring city. According to him, there used to be many communities there, but soon the resources were depleted and everyone left the area. The main character listened attentively to the man. He asked if there were any minerals left there. The owner explained that there were mines deep in the forest, but they were guarded by fierce animals. And then a door opened behind him. The hero licked his fingers and looked at the new visitors. Nicholas stood at the threshold. Next to him were an old man and a girl from the Royal Swordsman sect. Fortunately, Albert managed to use a spell to change his appearance. He didn't want his old acquaintance to recognize him. Suddenly, Nicholas turned around and looked around. The girl from the sect was confused. After this, the boy turned to his mentor, mentioning the familiar face of a man who passed by. Meanwhile, the hero was already there and calmly walking down the street. 3 days later, Kevin reached a nearby village, scouting out potential locations to create a cult. Suddenly, the owner of the establishment gave a signal about the approach of lake animals. In a moment, all the visitors were running madly in all directions. A nervous man informed Kevin that the establishment was closing. Immediately after this, the boy stood alone on the threshold of the tavern. The street was empty. The guy immediately went to meet potential enemies. At this time, terrible monsters emerged from the lake, devouring everything in their path. Suddenly, there was an explosion and the creatures were covered by a cloud of fire. Kevin flew here and used the nuclear missile summoning technique. The boy didn't want to let the surviving monsters go, so he sent a flock of firebirds at them. Everything around was covered in yellow clouds formed by explosions. Kevin left only charred carcasses of the monsters. Suddenly, something purple flashed behind the little warrior. The glow came from the magical aura of the manager sent by the Council of Elders. Kevin realized that he had just destroyed a lot of fertile soil. As compensation, he gave the man a bag containing 1 million spiritual stones. The unexpected guest invited the boy to look into the Council of Elders. The manager was happy to tell the guy more about these places. A month later, Albert announced a meeting in his temporary home. A frustrated Kate and Henry reported that they could not find a suitable location for the cult. Chris and Jack had equally bad news. The main character hung his head. He too could not boast of any successes. Suddenly, everyone gathered cast an ominous glance at Kevin. The next moment, Kevin put the artifact on the table and everyone around was surprised. It was a holographic map with 2 locations marked on it, one in the center of the lake, the other on top of the mountain. The boy explained that the manager had given him this valuable information, and he had also promised to reduce the detachment's taxes if they settled in one of these places. After some time, the team sat on the roof, waiting for Kevin to return. The guy confidently said that a small island in the center of the inexhaustible lake would be ideal for their needs. In addition, the boy made an agreement with the Council of Elders, so if they were attacked by strong monsters, help would come to them. Albert focused on the tax credit and was concerned about how long it would last. Kevin explained that it was forever, but to get it you had to make a deposit and sign a contract. The main character looked thoughtfully at the holographic map. He was tormented by doubts. A moment later, he snapped his fingers and the entire squad was transported into an illusion that replicated the island. This area was unusually beautiful, especially since it contained all the resources necessary for the creation of a sect. Another advantage of the island was its distance from the Royal Swordsman sect, which Nicholas belonged to. The hero clenched his fist and confidently declared to the squad that they would settle here. A little later, the team showed up in one of the nearby towns to meet the manager. He was quite cheerful. The man kindly offered to send one of his warriors to the island to clear the area of hostile creatures. The main character made cute eyes and handed the representative of the elders a bag of money. He promised to personally deal with the monsters. The man was blinded by Albert's incredible smile. It looked incredibly natural. The guy remembered his long and painful training. The manager happily announced that the island now belonged to the hero's team. He also handed them jade tablets on which all the necessary information was written. After some time, Albert explored the island's territory with the help of his bird. After this, the squad climbed to the highest point, which is where the future temple of the sect will be located. The mentor put his hand on Henry's shoulder and asked him to come up with a design for the building. A second later, the boy created the silhouette of the future temple. It looked quite majestic. Immediately after this, Albert created 1,000 dolls who began to build the future building. The squad admired the hero's skill because not everyone is able to control such a large number of wooden workers. The main character really liked it when his students complimented him. Chris suddenly said that he didn't know his old friend very well since he was surprised by such spells, so he suggested that the magician fix it. Albert tried to get rid of his annoying comrade, while Eva and Jack watched this absurd picture. The hero was quick to upset his team. They will have to work hard to finish the construction. After that, he ordered Chris and Kevin to go together to clear the island of monsters. Kate was tasked with exploring the lake bed and marking the location of the mines. The main character gave Jack and Henry the task of recruiting 100 talented students. Suddenly, Albert noticed that Ava was standing next to her daughter Emma, whom she had been hiding all this time. They were assigned to look after the dolls. When the entire squad dispersed, the main character breathed a sigh of relief. He had a difficult job ahead of him. With the help of a magic doll, he dug a deep cave that would serve as a warehouse. The guy also decided to build an automated farm in the future. The team also needs a conveyor belt to manufacture weapons for combat dolls. The magician looked thoughtfully into the distance. He had to live here for another 50 years before he could break through to the next stage. Suddenly, the guy had an epiphany. Now their network will be called the Sect of the Mystery of the Spirit. A whole month later, the construction of the temple was still ongoing. Chris watched the dolls work. He had already cleared the island, but sent Kevin to inspect the area. The guy was drinking with Albert and asked if it was true that all robots were controlled by a magic sphere. Suddenly, the warrior felt the presence of a large sphere behind him, and cold sweat ran down his face. Chris jumped up in fear, clutching his heart. The magical device had scared him greatly. The guy suggested calling the ball Churnish. The artifact's mechanical eye was filled with red light, which did not bode well. Suddenly, several holographic windows appeared around the warrior. He was very surprised. They opened up to photos of Chris training Jack, and judging by the boy's face, he was bored. Then came the photos of the guy trying not to look at his family when Henry appears next to them. The warrior felt ashamed that even a soulless robot had revealed his secret. Chris placed his palm on his forehead and respectfully greeted the puppet master. The guy was upset that he had to tell the terrible secret of his illegitimate son. Albert recalled the curse that bewitched his friend during the conception of the boy. The hero advised Chris to quickly tell his son the truth in order to make his fate easier. Jack and Henry soon returned, bringing with them 65 students. The hero was pleased with the students' work, despite the fact that they did not fulfill the plan. The children looked out over the side of the ship in amazement. They were burning with impatience to begin training. Henry remembered his first meeting with Albert with warmth. The ship began to land. The main character and Chris were already waiting for the arrivals. The warrior's sons reported to the hero about the work they had done. The magician praised them. The children were amazed by his mesmerizing smile. Albert decided to appoint Kate as the head of the sect, since she is the most disciplined and responsible. Henry and Jack said they weren't tired at all, so they decided to go get a new batch of students. Chris and the mentor watched the ship fly away. The warriors' children were very good. Meanwhile, Kate dived to the bottom of the lake with the help of a submarine that the hero provided her with. The girl read about the history of this place. In the distant past, cruel monsters invaded here. The student had a brilliant idea. Albert would make a device for her that would find valuable objects. The guy happily agreed to fulfill her request, also mentioning that Kate would soon become the head of the sect. The girl's expression immediately changed. She realized what a burden of responsibility would fall upon her. The student admitted that none of her classmates was more suited for the position than she was. Kate reluctantly agreed to become the head of the Spirit Mystery sect. At this time, the main character was sitting on the shore of the main character and was working hard on his new invention. He noted with disappointment that his sect was too poor compared to the others. The guy found a way out in his hands. Anything turns into a work of art. The next day, Albert handed Chris a ring with a shopping list. He asked him to take it with him to take Eva and have a good rest. The couple looked at the artifact in amazement. The magician planned to furnish the house, so he asked his friend to buy the necessary materials. In fact, the hero sent his wife with him so that no one would try to flirt with this handsome man. Chris was very surprised when he found out that the main character gave him a whole 100 million spiritual stones. Suddenly, Albert threw the guy a mysterious mask, and he was perplexed. The magician explained that she changes her appearance and hides her magical aura. A moment later, the couple went about their business, the hero watching them with his eyes. He decided to establish protection around the entire perimeter of the island, as well as equip it with satellite surveillance. Unfortunately, these grandiose plans were dashed by the lack of necessary resources. Meanwhile, Dylan was in the city. The fat man managed to catch a cold. His son Marcus, who was a modest and simple-minded guy, helped him cope with the illness. The father sadly remembered that his entire business had been destroyed due to the werewolf invasion. The plump man constantly thought about Albert, with whom he had lost contact long ago. Marcus tried to encourage his father, in his opinion. By moving to this city, he would be able to build an even better business. Suddenly, Chris and Eva walked behind. Dylan perked up and shot a sharp look at the couple. He ran out into the street and tried to stop his friend's acquaintances. The warrior couldn't understand how the fat man had revealed their identities if they had changed their appearance and clothes. Chris and Eva greeted Dylan friendly. Marcus joined the meeting, his father saying he didn't recognize their faces. He explained that his attention was drawn to the magic balls on the girl's belt. Chris offered Dylan to contact the protagonist if he agreed. To always stay in touch, the guy handed the plump man a device resembling a modern smartphone. After a few days, the fat man's face changed greatly. His eyes turned red because he had not slept, waiting for a message from Albert. Marcus was very worried about his father's condition, so he advised him to tear himself away from the screen. He replied that this message would return their family to the top of the business again. At that very moment, the hero learned from Chris about his meeting with Dylan. He expressed a desire to immediately contact his old comrade. The warrior also presented his friend with a gift brought from the city. It was a large round spiritual stone with a ring inside it. The magician almost immediately began to melt the outer shell in order to quickly get to the magical artifact. When the job was done, he looked inside the ring using his technique. Surprisingly, there were several piles of useful ores inside. Suddenly, the guy pulled out an astral crystal from there, which was quite valuable. It looked like a small blue star. With its help, you can clone the body and soul of a person in order to be reborn later. Now, all the hero's previous plans seemed like childish pranks. He had come up with something grandiose. Meanwhile, Marcus rushed to his father, as he believed he was starting to go delirious. In fact, Dylan finally received an invitation from Albert, who ordered his son to get ready to leave immediately. At that very moment, the main character was already thinking about how he would create an automated system that would do everything for him. The guy began the process of combining the runes. A thundercloud formed in the sky above the temple, and a purple glow appeared. Suddenly, the hero's hands began to shake. He was very scared of this. The next moment, a mysterious stone flew out of the cloud. Albert was incredibly happy with the successful completion of the ritual, so he happily greeted his new robot. The guy immediately ordered him to create an army of underwater dolls, an ore purification line, and optimize the island's landscape. The assistant stated that he could only complete 2 assignments because he lacked resources. The main character wanted to make friends with the robot, so he named him Vinogradinka. Soon, a ship from the city arrived on the sect's territory, carrying Dylan and Marcus. The fat man couldn't hold back his tears. He hugged the magician so tightly that several of his bones crunched. Albert invited his friend to come with him to discuss the details of their future cooperation. After a short discussion, the hero shook hands and appointed Dylan head of the Foreign Trade Department. The magician called Vinogradinka and instructed her to build a building for trade. The main character looked into the distance. He had no doubt about the sect's imminent financial success. Meanwhile, Dylan was overjoyed with his son. They would finally regain their fame. Suddenly, the guy felt that something was wrong, so he immediately went to investigate. Soon he saw a terrible picture. Monsters were bursting out of the water, trying to attack the dolls. Suddenly, lightning flashed over the monsters and the water became covered in crimson blood. The silhouette of a warrior wearing armor created by Albert was visible in the sky. A moment later, he cut through the giant tentacles that were emerging from the lake. The mentor praised Kevin for such bravery. Kate was worried about her brother. The hero hastened to calm the girl down. He had no doubts about the student's skill. The boy loomed over the group of surviving monsters, his eyes filled with determination. Suddenly, a huge creature appeared from the water, its appearance accompanied by a deafening roar. The monster looked disgusting. Its mouth was filled with sharp fangs. Kate was about to rush to help her brother, but the main character stopped her. Kevin wasn't at all afraid of the monster, on the contrary. He just grinned maliciously. Behind the boy appeared the figure of a man with many pairs of arms. A moment later, the student fired a huge fireball at the creature. The monster only had time to open its mouth before the core reached it. There was a powerful explosion, and the remaining monsters ran away in fear. Kevin could only breathe a sigh of relief. Kate looked at her strong brother with envy. The boy rushed to his mentor to boast of his victory. Surprisingly, the teacher was not delighted. He thought that the guy could easily defeat the monster and not try to show off his skills. But despite this, Albert praised Kevin's skill. The young warrior blushed with embarrassment. His sister was not delighted with the excessive attention paid to his person. Dylan advised his son to earn the protagonist's favor. Meanwhile, the magician noticed that the sect's money was almost gone. He was despondent. All his hopes were pinned on Dylan's professionalism. At the same time, a fat man entered the room and showed the guy a financial report. The head of the trade offered the main character to create armor much better than what he had already invented. Dylan planned to supply this armor to the city in order to make money from its sale. Albert ordered Vinogradinka to start building a conveyor belt for armor. When the fat man left, the hero noticed his students hiding behind the window. He listened to their proposal to sell valuable pills and treasures to improve the financial situation of the sect. After this, the guy flared up. He could not allow such a stupid waste of valuable artifacts. Albert scolded Kate. The other children were in a stupor. After this, the girl asked the mentor to cancel the rule of fighting with the doll so that she and her brother could break through to a new stage. The main character could not believe his ears and called it unacceptable. A few minutes later, the teacher decided to rectify the situation and snapped his fingers. He said that he would give his students complete freedom of action if they could hold out in battle with him for at least 5 minutes. The guy was pleased with his idea. It would not only moderate the children's ardor, but also help them hone their skills. The students were not very happy with this state of affairs, realizing that they did not have a single chance. Suddenly, Kevin's spirit perked up. He had long dreamed of measuring his strength with the hero, but was afraid to do it alone. The next moment, Henry bound his mentor with a special technique. The boy did his best to hold off the magician as long as possible. After a few seconds, his strength began to leave him, so the other children rushed to help him. Kevin launched his powerful fire projectile at Albert, which he had recently used to kill the giant monster. The teacher smiled. The boy was too slow for him. A second later, the projectile reflected by the hero rushed straight at Kevin, leaving only a skeleton of him. The main character scattered magic seeds around himself. A flower grew behind him, next to which Kate appeared. It turned out that she used the invisibility technique. Immediately after this, the guy challenged Jack to a sword duel. The boy rushed at him, but already realized that he would not be able to land a single blow. A moment later, their blades collided, creating a bright spark. A little later, Albert ordered his defeated students to continue training. 3 months later, Dylan happily informed the protagonist about an upcoming deal to sell the armor. The magician placed his hand on his friend's shoulder and expressed gratitude to him on behalf of the entire sect of the mystery of the spirit. After that, the guy went to his secret base to study the magic stone he found during his walk. It was a stone that could imbue any object with divine properties. The main character looked at his valuable find with pleasure. He was distracted from this activity by Vinogradinka, who reported the completion of the construction of the conveyor. The guy suggested that the robot start producing magic pills. Albert instructed his assistant to take care of the matter in a few days. Unexpectedly, the magician received his geolocation from Kate. The mentor immediately rushed to his student. The girl asked the hero to guess what she had found, and he thought about it. Without waiting for an answer, she said that this was one of the worlds of the small chiliocosm. The main character immediately asked if there were any values in this world. Kate was disappointed to say that the opposite was true. But suddenly the girl screamed that there was an entire human state inside. The boy upset the student. They are not yet able to take him into their care. Kate placed a marker next to the portal. Perhaps it would be useful to them in the future. Suddenly, an unknown guy burst out from there and rushed away. The hero asked the student to evaluate his fighting abilities. He turned out to be a rather weak warrior. The stranger watched Albert and the girl with surprise. Kate happily greeted the unusual guest. The protagonist grabbed the student by the hair and rushed away, advising the guy to go to the central continent. The girl did not understand what was happening. According to the mentor, this warrior was too dangerous and could cause a lot of trouble. The guy, left alone, asked the couple not to leave him. 10 days later, while fishing, the hero noticed that same stranger behind him. The warrior greeted the magician kindly and asked what this place was. Albert responded rudely, pointing to the sign with the name. It turned out that the guest did not understand the writing of the alien world. This prompted the protagonist to tell that the guy had entered the territory of the Spirit Mystery sect. After this, the warrior picked up a fishing rod lying nearby and expressed a desire to join the team. The hero advised the guest to think about his decision, because their sect was just beginning to develop. The next moment, the stranger pulled a huge fish out of the lake. Soon, Albert called Jack to him, and the boy immediately rushed over. The hero instructed the student to fight the guest to test his fighting skills. The guy immediately gave Jack a cold look. He wasn't going to feel sorry for him. Just before the fight, the stranger finally introduced himself. His name was Levi. After this, the swordsmen bowed to each other as a sign of respect. A moment later, the opponents' blades clashed, their menacing gazes meeting. A second later, Jack used the wind element to gain a slight advantage. A stream of air instantly surrounded Levi. He was at a loss. The boy created a protective aura around himself to prevent the boy from striking. Jack immediately rushed past, saying that this would not help his opponent. The young warrior was distracted by the conversation, so Levi was able to pick the right moment and attack his opponent. The boy, thrown aside, was not going to give up. He accumulated energy in his sword and directed it at the enemy. A powerful explosion thundered where the guest from another world was. When the smoke cleared, Levi could only admit defeat and fall to his knees. Jack admitted that his victory was due to the blade being too powerful. Suddenly, Albert jumped out of the bushes and began to praise his student. The guest sadly realized his loss and asked the protagonist to give him another chance. He gave Levi 3 tries, and if he won at least once, the boy would join the sect. On the way to the temple, Jack asked the mentor to give him and his brother powerful abilities. Albert replied with a smile on his face that it was too early for them to think about it. The magician also asked the boy to evaluate the fighting skills of his recent opponent. The student acknowledged his rather outstanding swordsmanship and strong desire to win. The protagonist ordered Jack to continue training in order to defeat Levi again. Otherwise, the mentor promised to expel the boy from the sect, but he was dumbfounded. This harsh ultimatum motivated the young warrior to become even stronger. Suddenly, the teacher pointed his finger to the sky, where a beautiful and well-sharpened blade was hovering. Suddenly, the weapon shot towards the lake, piercing the head of a giant crab that emerged from it. Jack watched his mentor's technique with admiration. In the future, it would be his. Immediately after this, Albert asked his student to take the defeated animal to Kate to cook it. In the evening, the hero ate his fill of several plates of rice with crab. Everyone praised the girl's culinary skills and she blushed with embarrassment. After a hearty dinner, the magician asked the children to express their opinions on his plan for developing the sect. Kate asked to be allowed to go on a treasure hunt. Henry wanted to travel around the central continent. Jack agreed with his brother. Kevin decided to stay with his teacher. Albert was not very happy with what was happening. The magician couldn't believe that he had failed to raise his children well. The guy harshly reproached the students for their irresponsible attitude towards the future of the sect and ordered them to start working. 6 months later, the main character and Dylan were celebrating a successful deal worth $400 million. During their business conversation, they discussed the imminent creation of a trading company. The fat man noted that this would be an excellent opportunity to start collecting important information. After that, Dylan walked off contentedly to do his business. Hugging a bag of money he had earned, Albert came up with the idea of building a large flying ship. Soon the hero met Chris, who greeted him kindly. The warrior reported the disappointing news to his comrade. Werewolves began to capture neighboring countries. Chris expressed a desire to join the volunteer squad in order to receive a good reward. Besides, He really wanted to see his family, and a stingy tear rolled down his cheek. Albert agreed to fulfill his friend's request, but first he needed to make new equipment for him. 3 months later, the magician gave the boy a magic ring in which all the necessary supplies were sealed. The hero also asked his friend to definitely come back in 50 years. Chris promised to be as careful as possible, his gaze filled with determination. The main character had a fun time seeing off his best friend. After this, the magician could only look into the distance at the departing ship. 3 months later, the clerk of the Council of Elders visited the sect along with his assistant. Albert introduced the man to Kate, who was the head of the settlement. The clerk took a mysterious scroll out of his pocket, and the hero and his student froze in anticipation. The guest smiled wickedly as he presented the Spirit Mystery sect with a tax bill of 30 million. The man then spoke about the 36 Aryans who founded the Council of Elders more than 30,000 years ago. The clerk explained that the 56 Aryans currently living were monitoring the situation throughout the continent. They do this with the help of a Skywatch device and a starship that helps them reach other worlds. They also use 4 magic mirrors which reflect the origins of all causes and effects. The clerk continued his story for a long time. Albert did not listen to him at all. Suddenly the man stopped and hinted that if the sect did not pay taxes, it could pay dearly for it. A moment later, the main character handed him several bags containing the entire required amount. Suddenly, the magician asked whether the council would help the sect if it was attacked. The clerk explained that the elders would only intervene if the enemies were werewolves. If a settlement is attacked by a specific person, then he will be declared wanted and a reward will be assigned, the hero thought. Suddenly, the magician realized that the clerk's constant chatter was starting to irritate him. Albert was also concerned about whether the council could reveal information about the cult to anyone who asked for it. The clerk promised to ensure the settlement remained as discreet as possible and apologized for sending Levi here. After this, the main character saw the man off. The guy admitted that the elders were quite clever at making money out of thin air. Kate invited her mentor to join the council when their sect had grown quite a bit. Albert just smiled sweetly, looking at the little naive girl. Meanwhile, work on the armor production line was in full swing. Dylan convinced the protagonist to make small deliveries of armor. He was not too happy. Vinogradinka informed the magician that there were 5 disciples in the sect who had potential in forging and alchemy. Suddenly, the robot said something unusual. Among all the students, there is a boy named Steve. Albert froze. At this time, a duel was taking place between Steve and another student, and they were being judged by a guy with a monocle. The enemy used a primitive technique to summon rain. The boy thought he impressed Steve, but Steve wasn't surprised at all. The talented student with glasses used his secret technique, and a strange cloud formed in the sky. The next moment, a small pile of manure fell right on the upstart's face. Immediately after this, everything around was flooded with fertilizer rain. The main character burst into loud laughter. He really liked this boy's way of thinking. Albert decided to take Steve under his personal tutelage. Suddenly, an alarm sounded, warning of an invasion of beasts. The magician was beside himself with anger. A few minutes later, he was already heading to the place where they appeared to deal with them once and for all. All the island's cannons were switched to combat readiness and had already begun firing at the monsters. At this very time, Kevin was happily using his explosive techniques. Seeing his mentor's ship on the horizon, the boy reported that the situation was under control. Immediately after this, Albert and Kate set out to search for the leader of the beasts. Having donned the armor, the protagonist asked his student to be careful. A moment later, the main character created a giant robot around himself. The mage asked Kate to attack the monsters from behind while he distracted them with a frontal attack. The girl clenched her hand into a fist. Next to her mentor, she was afraid of nothing. A second later, the body of the huge robot dived into the lake, ramming one of the monsters. The guy then grabbed the soul of this creature to explore its memories. It turned out that the attack was carried out by a giant turtle that wanted to take its eggs from the island. Albert became furious and promised to defeat the animal at any cost. He and Kate then moved on to lure the reptile into a trap. At that very second, several monsters burst out of the water with their mouths wide open. In a moment, the protagonist turned them into a pile of mincemeat with the help of his techniques. Suddenly, several monsters in the spirit birth stage appeared from the lake. The main character did not lose his composure and used the electromagnetic copy technique. Columns of water rose into the air from the powerful explosion. Despite this, the vile creatures were still alive. Albert did not despair. He scattered a bunch of magic seeds around him. After a few seconds, magical flowers began to grow from the monsters' bodies, absorbing the creatures' bodies. The hero could only watch as his enemies turned into fertilizer. Suddenly, a giant turtle finally emerged from the water and let out a loud roar. The aggressive animal growled and began to approach the main character. The magician used a technique to create a water vortex around himself. The titanic reptile, in response to this, created an energy ball in its mouth. At that very moment, Kate managed to get closer to the beast. She prepared her sword. A moment later, the girl jumped away from the turtle's thick skin, which decided that she had been bitten by a mosquito. The student's armor fell apart from the force of the blow. The protagonist was upset, so he asked her to concentrate as much as possible. Suddenly, the monster shot water jets at him, and the guy miraculously dodged them. In revenge for such meanness, the magician launched several lightning bolts at the animal. Kate prepared to attack the distracted giant again. A few seconds later, the girl's blade sank into the beast's thick skin. At the sight of the impact, a small explosion occurred, tearing off part of the monster's flesh. Suddenly, the reptile's skin tightened, and the student was perplexed. Albert calmly watched what was happening, advising Kate to wait a little. Suddenly, the monster's entire body was seized by a sharp, stabbing pain. The turtle rose above the water's surface and roared shrilly in pain. Suddenly, a magic flower appeared on her head, and the animal froze in fear. The protagonist and Kate approached the reptile. Now they will be able to control it. The girl admired the beautiful plant with bated breath. The turtle looked menacingly at the aquatic inhabitants, who wanted to laugh at her. A little later, the hero used a special mental technique to find out how the beast got here. Having learned that the reptile had laid eggs here long ago, Albert decided to allow her and her cubs to remain and live on the island. After some time, all 12 little turtles were found. Mom took them in and agreed to stay here. That night, Kevin and Kate capriciously asked their mentor to teach them a technique that turns enemies into flowers. Albert said that they would not be able to own her. The brother and sister were very upset. Suddenly, Jack declared that today's battle had made him stronger, and now he was ready to break through to the next stage. Henry said the same thing, also demonstrating his skills. The main character thoughtfully watched the relationship between two stepbrothers. The ash-haired boy smiled at his comrade. In reality, he was hiding his true abilities so as not to embarrass his friend. The hero congratulated his students on such rapid development. All 4 children looked at their mentor with a careful gaze. Then they made dissatisfied faces, noticing the pretense and artificiality in the magician's smile and words. 3 months later, Albert and Kate were having a pleasant conversation about her brother's successes. The teacher suggested that she go for treasure, as she wanted. The girl looked pitifully into her mentor's eyes. She felt something unusual. The boy began to think about how he would set the children free, allowing them to create their own destiny. Kate was ready to burst into bitter tears, thinking about her abandoned brother and mentor. Suddenly, there was a loud bang behind them and a pillar of light shot into the sky. A giant human figure appeared above the forest. Magical music sounded next to him, and the creature began to rapidly shrink. It turned out that it was the aura that accompanied Kevin's breakthrough. Later, the boy told his teacher the good news about his success. Albert praised his student. Kate was incredibly happy for her brother. Jack and Henry also reported their long-awaited breakthrough. The magician congratulated them, but in fact he was upset that he was at a stage much lower than his students. As a reward, the hero gave the boys scrolls with powerful techniques and allowed them to set off on a free journey. The disciples promised not to leave the central continent so as not to disturb their mentor. 3 days later, Kate, Henry, and Jack left the cult. The protagonist thought about them with sadness. Dylan encouraged his friend. A little later, Albert looked into the prayer room, where Steve was meditating. The guy tried to use his mind to read the manga that the hero recommended to him. Suddenly, the mentor entered the room and invited his protege to have lunch. Steve, like a madman, jumped up and began to threaten the unexpected guest. Suddenly, the illusion was shattered and the boy realized what he had just done. A few minutes later, the couple was already greedily devouring the delicious noodles. Albert admired the boy for a long time, on whom he placed quite high hopes. After 10 years, things started to go better in the sect. A manager named Bruce came to report to the fishing magician. When the guy left, Steve woke up and asked why the hero appointed him as the manager. The teacher made a funny face and quoted a character from his favorite manga. He also reminded the student about his manure rain, and he became embarrassed. The boy stated that he had long been able to use more powerful techniques and created a fecal tornado. Suddenly, he asked his mentor to allow him to demonstrate his latest invention. Steve picked up a regular bullet and began to connect it with fire. Immediately after this, the student fired a bullet from his finger, as if it were a loaded pistol. Albert was not particularly impressed, in his opinion. The technique requires serious improvement. Suddenly, the hero launched his bullet several hundred meters into the sky, hitting right in the head of a 2-headed bird flying past. A moment later, the carcass of a dead animal fell into the lake next to the magician and his student. Steve lifted his glasses and froze in amazement. The main character suggested that the guy go outside the sect for the first time to gain experience and knowledge, and he thought about it. The student expressed reluctance to leave the sect. Most likely he was afraid of the unknown. The mentor ordered the boy to visit 24 cities of the central continent and send him a photo of each of them. The magician also reminded Steve of his long-standing promise to visit his native village and meet with a certain Isabel. These words struck straight into Steve's heart. It turned out that the girl had been married for several years. Albert asked the guy not to be upset because he would definitely find his soulmate. Meanwhile, in one of the nearby towns, local residents looked at the stranger with admiration. She was Lily. Riding on a wonderful deer, she was trying to find her husband. The girl heard about the werewolf attack and went in search of her beloved. At this time, one of the blacksmiths of the Royal Swordsman sect made a powerful weapon for Nicholas. The young man sincerely thanked his friend for the work he had done. Suddenly, the old swordsman made a sarcastic remark, saying that Albert would have forged a much better sword. Nicholas was once again lost in memories of his old lost friend. In desperation, the boy offered the blacksmith to take the rune treasures that he had been setting aside for the hero. The old man ordered his student not to give in to his feelings, and he looked at him angrily. Suddenly, Nicholas saw in the blacksmith's gaze a sparkle that was inherent to the main character. Immediately after this, the young man hurried to the exit. He looked thoughtfully and melancholically into the distance, again remembering his comrade. Meanwhile, Albert and Steve tested the system of hiding the island from prying eyes. Two new students flying on a ship were amazed by the magic frog. Their captain was trying to finish his caramel apples. It turned out to be Henry, who advised the passengers to prepare for a meeting with the mentor. Upon arrival, the grown-up boy was very surprised. During his absence, the sect of the Mystery of the Spirit had seriously changed. Suddenly, he used a secret technique and turned into a little boy. The student standing nearby almost squealed with delight when he saw Henry's skill. The boy prepared the children for the meeting with the hero and asked them to be respectful to him. A few minutes later, the boy returned and greeted his teacher. The children standing behind Henry looked around in surprise. Suddenly, the protagonist opened his eyes wide, noticing the strong resemblance between the two and the student who had just returned. Albert thought they were Henry's children, so he started asking him about everything. The guy explained that he had nothing to do with them. He just saved these little ones and took them with him. He told a sad story. The entire village of these children was slaughtered by bandits. The magician realized that Henry had taken them in because he himself was an orphan. The boy had a talent for blacksmithing, and the girl was well versed in alchemy. At Henry's command, they unanimously asked Albert to take them on as his students. Suddenly, these twins awakened in the hero memories of his first meeting with Kate and Kevin. Having thrown them aside, the protagonist kindly invited the brother and sister into their new home. The children smiled widely with joy, and an ash-haired boy watched them. After this, Henry turned around, hearing the teacher inviting him to have tea. Over a cup of delicious drink, Albert reminded the boy of his goal to get even with his father. Suddenly, Henry, with a frightening smile on his face, announced that he had a new goal. Then he wanted to ask if Chris was his biological father, but the hero fell into a stupor. The frightened magician asked the boy to elaborate on his new motivation before he would answer the question. Henry admitted that he wanted to use the 100 rebirth technique he had recently learned. He poured some more tea. The guy just wanted to give his parents happiness. The mentor lay down on the table and asked how Jack was doing. The boy said that he was fine and promised to communicate well with him, despite the story with his father. In the past, Jack and Henry went on a camping trip. They became close and decided that from now on they would be like brothers. The guys took care of each other, not letting anyone get discouraged. Albert broke out in a cold sweat. It was hard for him to hide the truth from the ash-haired boy. At this time, Chris tried to escape from the pack of werewolves, calling for help. A grown-up Jack came to his father's rescue and did not allow the monsters to get to him. Chris put on a sweet face and said he was very proud of his son. The boy paid no attention to him. Instead, he ordered his father to hide in a safe place. A few minutes later, he was already complaining to his wife about his bad relationship with his son, and Ava was encouraging him. At that very moment, Albert was fishing. His new students noticed an approaching boat. When she came closer, the hero saw in her a deer and his wife. Immediately after this, the girl rushed into the arms of her beloved. The hero almost fell off his feet, but was nevertheless glad to meet Lily again. After talking a little, the magician invited her on a tour of the island. A few minutes later, Lily was admiring the beauty of the local buildings. Albert happily introduced his beloved to the inhabitants of the sect. Suddenly, the girl suggested that all the locals try the treat she had brought, and the magician was surprised. After distributing the gifts, she admitted that she found them in the ruins of another sect. The guest sighed sadly because her mentor had forbidden her to love until she gained control over her heavenly spirit. Suddenly, the protagonist hugged his wife tightly to calm her down and support her. Suddenly, the communication device in his back pocket began to beep. Almost instantly, the guy ran to the ship. The Council of Elders appointed a meeting with him. There he was met by a clerk and asked to help them with an important matter. The man said that one of the elders is trying to develop his abilities together with his wife, but they are not succeeding. Albert shamed the council because they couldn't handle such nonsense. The sect needed money, so the magician handed the manager a scroll with the necessary technique. The man immediately ordered his assistant to take it to the elder. He also gave the main character a package sent by Chris. When the conversation turned to the reward, the manager began to suspiciously change the subject. Suddenly, an elder entered the room, a powerful flow of energy emanating from him. He introduced the hero to his younger sister Naomi. She was quite pretty. The man thanked Albert for the scroll, showing the power he could bring back. As a reward, he gave Naomi to the guy, who began to refuse such a generous offer. The elder decided that the protagonist did not respect him, so he raised his voice. Albert had to accept the gift, and the satisfied man headed for the exit. Later, Lily almost went crazy when she saw her husband with a strange girl. The hero began to calm his beloved, promising to explain everything. She didn't want to listen to him, so she threw her fist straight into the mage's face. He froze in anticipation of the blow, his eyes wide open. At the last moment, he was able to dodge and said that Naomi was Kevin's bride. The boy was at a loss. His face expressed bewilderment. Albert encouraged his student, and besides, the bride was beautiful and kind. Several days passed. The main character was looking after his goldfish. Suddenly, he noticed the sad Lily and Naomi sitting at the table. His wife explained that the wedding was coming up and the bride still didn't have a wedding dress. Immediately after these words, the hero gave the guest a magic ball that allowed her to create any clothing. A moment later, the girl was already dressed in a beautiful red dress. Lily began to run around her to take a closer look at her friend's new outfit. The magician offered Naomi to become an external student of the sect. She immediately agreed, because this would allow her to see her fiancé more often. While the hero was handing the girl useful pills and scrolls, Lily quietly left. She ran into her husband's room to look for dressing-up balls. When Lily found them, she was very happy, but a stunned Albert was already standing on the threshold. The wife turned to him, when suddenly the artifact began to glow. A moment later, the girl was dressed in a rather revealing outfit, which was invented by the main character. Next, she wore a cat costume with ears and paws. Suddenly, blood began to flow from the hero's nose and he fell to the floor. Lily rushed to her beloved and began to examine him carefully. The guy calmed his wife down and said that he was completely fine. At that moment, Kate burst into the room, having received an invitation to her brother's wedding. A strange picture appeared right before her eyes. Lily was lying right on top of Albert, who was bleeding. A few seconds later, the girl rushed away, taking the magic ball with her. Left with the teacher, the girl apologized and said that she had brought something interesting. After this, the hero and Kate went to the prayer house to drink some calming tea. The student said that during her hike, she joined a group of treasure hunters and got into some trouble. Suddenly, the girl encountered a giant monster, which was a werewolf battle doll. Kate stood in a satisfied pose because she managed to overcome such a giant. An excited Albert asked her to quickly get to the most important thing. A moment later, the upset student pulled out a sphere from her pocket, which contained something large. The main character took the ball in his hand and carefully examined the mysterious artifact. Suddenly, a huge skyship appeared from it, and the magician froze with his eyes wide open. Such a vessel was highly valued, so the boy was afraid that warriors from other sects would want to get their hands on it. The mentor asked if all the hunters were killed. Kate replied that they were all killed by the monster. Then the main character became a little upset, since he was not yet able to finish building the ship. The girl offered to sell the useless ship. Albert looked at her angrily. The magician's eyes lit up with a bright flame. He decided to intensify the children's training in order to increase their discipline. A little later, Vinogradinka examined the sphere to find out what exactly was needed for repairs. Quite expensive materials were required. The hero became a little despondent and thought out loud that even selling the entire island would not be enough. Hearing this, the robot began to prepare the sect's territory for sale. The magician and Kate were very scared. Albert began to shake the soulless machine to stop this process. A few seconds later, Vinogradinka came to her senses, and the mentor and his student breathed a sigh of relief. The girl, making cute eyes, asked to improve her rifle and replenish her supplies of ammunition. The hero stroked her head and said that everything had been ready for a long time. Kate looked at her weapon in amazement, admiring every detail of it. The girl immediately went to the entrance to the lands of the ancient werewolves to get prey. The boy sadly admitted that his student had left him again. Meanwhile, Naomi and her husband were in the bedroom, dressed in wedding attire, Kevin blushing with embarrassment. Suddenly, the main character kicked the door down. The newlyweds were very scared. The teacher grabbed him and ordered him to go on his honeymoon immediately. He was upset. He then pulled the sweetly sleeping Steve straight out of his bed. Albert asked Dylan to take the two to different cities so they could become independent. The fat man happily agreed to fulfill his best friend's request. The next day, swordsman Levi fought with a battle doll. With one of his blows, the opponent knocked the guy straight to the ground. The main character, who was fishing nearby, mocked the warrior's failure. The young man, with his mouth full of grass, admitted that he would probably never be able to join the spirit mystery sect. Levi wanted to become the protector of his world, so the magician offered to buy him out. A spark flashed in the guy's eyes. The hero set a price of 800 million. The swordsman thanked the master for such a generous offer. After some time, Albert remembered the box sent by Chris. Opening it, he found several hollow werewolf bones that served as storage containers for anything. The first one contained household utensils. The hero threw them out like unnecessary trash. In the second, the magician discovered useful pills and runic items. Taking the last one in his hands, the guy was surrounded by an unknown aura. Inside were valuable resources with which he planned to improve Vinogradinka. At this very time, Nicholas was walking through one of the cities on the continent, arguing heatedly with his mentor. The old man ordered the young man to stop thinking about Albert all the time. Suddenly, the student pulled the sword, necessary for the implementation of the old swordsman's plan, from its sheath and began to bend it strongly. The teacher almost fainted from what he saw. The old man began desperately trying to stop Nicholas. Suddenly, the young man let go of one edge of the sword, and it hit his mentor right in the face. Suddenly, the old swordsman drew the boy's attention to the girl standing in front. It was Kate, who had changed her appearance. Nicholas invited her to join his group. The girl looked closely at the young man's face, immediately realizing that she had met him before. A minute later, they shook hands and Kate joined the treasure hunting party. A few hours later, the swordsman organized a meeting of the entire team. The leader, smiling sweetly, suggested that the participants divide all the treasures they found equally. Meanwhile, one explorer discovered the entrance to the sacred land of the ancient werewolves and decided to notify others about it. All those who received the message immediately rushed upward to quickly find the valuables. Nicholas's squad set out to retrieve the treasure on his magic sword. The old man advised the guy to be careful with the girl. He took this into account. Then the young man turned around and looked closely into Kate's face. A few minutes later, they and the other treasure hunters reached the gate hanging in the air. Meanwhile, Albert watched the live broadcast from there, standing on the shell of a giant turtle. The presenter talked about the unusual interest that treasure hunters showed in the unusual find. He then spoke about the terrible monsters that inhabited this place in the past, after which he said goodbye to the audience. The main character was unhappy because he had hoped to see a live broadcast from the other side of the gate. Suddenly, the guy had an idea. He called Vinogradinka to him and asked the robot to find a student who could be made into a video blogger. Meanwhile, one boy was hiding in the bushes and watching the date between the guy and the girl. Suddenly, he received a message demanding that he immediately appear before his mentor. The boy immediately rushed to the magician who was fishing. The student respectfully greeted his teacher. His name was Alex. Albert said that he called him for an important reason. The boy began to panic. It seemed that the teacher found out about his secrets. After some time, Alex showed the magician his recently recorded videos. Seeing them, the hero couldn't believe his eyes. He didn't know that his charges were doing such obscenities. After the video screening, the main character handed the boy a scroll and invited him to go on a trip to the major cities of the continent. The mentor also explained the purpose of the trip. Alex must discreetly occupy the most beautiful girls he sees. Hearing this, the student's eyes widened and he couldn't believe his ears. Albert tidied up the boy and explained that he simply needed to capture them in their everyday surroundings and nothing more. He also asked him to keep a special rating of girls. After this, the magician threw Alex a bag of money. He would need it. Then the main character blinded the guy with his incomparable smile. Soon the student went on a journey. Albert accompanied him. After some time, the hero remembered a capable warrior whom he noticed in one of Alex's videos. Vinogradinka reported that a large number of talented students are studying in the sect. The master took an important pose. He decided to develop methods for each of them. After 3 months, almost all students received their own personal educational equipment. A guy named Mason was incredibly happy with such a generous gift from the master. Meanwhile, the main character watched his charges thanking him from the roof of the temple. Albert smiled sweetly. looking forward to their rapid career growth. At this point, Nicholas was telling the other squad that they had no valuables. The leader of the robbers ordered the young man to immediately give up everything they had found. All of the swordsman's companions gave up their magic rings to save their lives. Nicholas refused and stood in front of the bandit leader. The nasty guy advised him to change his mind immediately. Instead, the warrior created several flying swords and prepared for battle. Then a giant silhouette of a dragon appeared above the swordsman's head. The bandit leader grinned. He had long wanted to fight a worthy opponent. Suddenly, the entire squad of bandits was pierced by invisible arrows, and their leader froze. The next moment, Nicholas quickly rushed to the attack. The young man and the enemy leader glared at each other. At that very moment, Kate was covering her team from a nearby cliff. She looked playfully through the scope, burning with impatience to try out her rifle as soon as possible. Nicholas was able to stop the enemy's blade with his hand at the last moment. The old man was unhappy with his student's weakness. It irritated him to no end. A second later, the swordsman made the dragon vomit a bunch of swords from its mouth. Unfortunately, the enemy managed to dodge the deadly attack. Nicholas gathered his wits and stood in a sword stance, crossing his fingers. A moment later, the dragon rushed towards the two surviving bandits. The assistant covered himself and the leader with a special shield. Suddenly, a bullet fired by Kate destroyed the barrier and pierced the bandit's head. The leader, enraged by this, decided to go after the girl to take revenge. Suddenly, Nicholas jumped high into the air and fired several sharp swords at him. A moment later, a large fountain of scarlet blood gushed from the bandit's mouth. The strong swordsman had no choice but to leave the scene of the recent battle. A little later, Kate joined him and suggested dividing equally all the treasures found so far. They had several large piles of spiritual stones, each receiving 16 million. The leader also asked the girl to leave him all the werewolf weapons she found, but she was a little unhappy. Unexpectedly, the old swordsman hinted to his student about his companion's weakness in close combat, and the boy was taken aback. The mentor hovered over him, begging him to take away Kate's share. A moment later, he whispered in Nicholas's ear that he could do it himself. The girl looked at her commander's hand, filled with energy and bewilderment. In his head, the swordsman ordered the old man to stop trying to take control of his body. Stopping the teacher, the young man kindly handed his partner the box containing her share of the treasure. After this, Nicholas looked thoughtfully after Kate as she left. It turned out that it was her doll. The real treasure hunter was hiding in the bushes. Meanwhile, Albert, wearing sunglasses, was cutely counting little turtles. Soon their mother attracted the hero's attention by raising her head from the water. The magician fed the giant animal a tasty treat from his hand. He also fed her children. The guy planned to make magical guards out of them. The main character thought about the fact that in 1,000 years, only these turtles will remain his friends. These thoughts made him break out in a cold sweat. Albert had no desire to become a turtle hermit. Arriving on the shore of the island, he noticed a strange movement in the water. A few seconds later, the head of a disguised Kate appeared from there. The teacher pulled his student out of the water. He learned of her presence from Vinogradinka. After some time, the hero tried to dry the girl with his magic hairdryer. Kate placed a beautiful jug on the table, which contained very expensive tea. Albert almost instantly caught the unusual scent with his nose. Soon the girl poured her mentor a drink into the expensive tea set she had bought. The main character shed a small tear. He hoped that the student would spend part of the money on helping the sect, and not on such nonsense. Kate also reported about a mysterious guy from the sect of Royal Swordsmen. The magician choked on his tea, immediately realizing who they were talking about. The teacher ordered his charge to stay as far away from him as possible. Then the girl showed the teacher the unnecessary things she found during her hike. At this time, Nicholas was in the buyer's shop, demanding 200 million for his treasures. The slightly angry worker tried to lower the price, but to no avail. Meanwhile, Bruce brought his master and Kate a delicious lunch. He also asked the hero to examine his scroll with plans for the construction of experimental testing grounds. The magician crossed out several of them, but approved the launch of the rest. The main character asked the girl to look at something interesting. Mason, one of the strongest students, appeared on the screen. Kate felt a little dizzy from the excessive realism of the image. Suddenly, she received a letter asking for help from Kevin. The sister immediately went to her brother. Albert asked her to hurry. At this time, Kevin and Naomi were talking on the street of one of the cities on the continent. Suddenly, a stranger ran up to them and invited the guy to join their sect of 1,000 Paths. The warrior stated that he was already a member of a similar organization, which upset the unexpected guest. The 1,000 Paths. Sect Boy began to praise his mentor, mentioning his outstanding abilities. When Kevin refused again, the stranger threatened to challenge his comrades to a competition with the warrior. Hearing this, The excited disciple of the Albert sect hurried to shake hands with his new acquaintance. A few hours later, Kevin, Naomi, and Kate had already arrived at the battle arena, anticipating an interesting battle to come. The faces of the warriors' opponents looked rather arrogant and disgusting. Suddenly, the instigator of this entire battle noticed that Kate had started broadcasting live. He was a little embarrassed, apparently fearing the possible public defeat of his comrades. Unexpectedly, Kevin suggested putting 3 opponents against him at once to give him at least one chance to win. The warriors of the Thousand Paths sect did not tolerate such insolence, preparing their hands to use techniques. Soon a protective dome was formed over the battle arena. Meanwhile, Albert called the twins Thomas and Riley to watch the battle together. Soon, the 3 of them were waiting with bated breath for the fight to begin. Suddenly, Kevin's opponent used a camouflage technique, becoming completely invisible. The warrior did not lose his composure and brought down a rain of stones on the enemy, revealing his disguise. The guy's next opponent stepped forward. He was dressed in armor. Kevin donned the armor forged by the protagonist. The hero and the twins enjoyed watching the battle as if it were a movie. Soon, a warrior from the Spirit Mystery sect used a technique that created a lava waterfall. Fiery silhouettes rushed towards the enemy, who lay on the ground and shook with fear. His comrades decided to find Albert and lure him to their side. Suddenly, the main character choked on his popcorn, sensing something was wrong. A moment later, Kevin formed a huge figure of a multi-armed man, preparing for a powerful attack. All the enemies were blinded by the light emanating from him. Kate and Naomi wore sunglasses to protect themselves from the glow. The dome dispersed, marking Kevin's crushing victory. As a reward, the sect's disciples gave the boy a source of the wood element. The warrior began to refuse the gift, considering it undeserved for such an easy victory. After testing the quality of the signal, the magician came up with the idea of sending his doll outside and controlling it like a video game character. He then took Thomas and Riley to go test his idea. A few minutes later, the main character was checking the functionality of his combat doll. Unfortunately, this model was not suitable for long-range combat, which struck Albert right in the heart. Then the guy hysterically ordered Vinogradinka to solve this problem. With tears in his eyes, the hero allocated 1 billion spiritual stones for this purpose. Soon, all the necessary materials were delivered to Albert, who was still wiping tears from his face. After this, the master took out the magic stone he needed so much from the box. After 10 days, the main character tested his robot. Kate couldn't be happier. When the doll landed, the boy introduced her to the girl. The student hugged her mentors double tightly. She would finally be able to go on treasure hunts with him. He handed Kate a transmitter, which was necessary to maintain a good signal. Albert also threatened to punish the student if she broke the robot. Soon the magician gathered Kate for a hike. He was eager to test the doll in the field. At this time, Jack and Henry were discussing Chris's recent bite from a dangerous snake. The ash-haired boy immediately noticed that his friend was worried about something else. The warrior explained his difficult situation. In 3 years of being on the front lines, he had not developed his abilities at all. He suddenly slammed his fist on the table, ashamed of his helplessness before his mentor. Henry poured some more tea, offering to help with the problem. The boy said that with the extra life he lived, Jack would be able to improve his situation. The desperate warrior thanked his sworn brother and agreed to this adventure. The boys clinked their glasses before beginning the complex process of transformation. Jack expressed concern about where he would end up after the ritual was completed. Having calmed his comrade, Henry began to implement his idea. An unusual glow appeared above the warrior, indicating his successful transfer to the world of love. The ash-haired boy realized the full horror of what had happened. Jack would have no place to train there. Using the flower petals, he began to wonder whether he should wake up his friend. Suddenly, Henry panicked, realizing how much time he had wasted on this nonsense. The guy was incredibly worried about his friend and looked at him with fear. The next day, Jack woke up and began to show his friend his new skills. His adopted brother was indescribably happy about his success. Soon the swordsman thanked Henry and went to visit his sick father. The ash-haired boy asked if it was interesting to visit another world. Jack remembered the female version of his friend he almost married. In the end, the swordsman only blushed from these memories and did not answer anything intelligible. Meanwhile, the main character's doll was fighting in the air with an evil tiger, covered by Kate. Albert controlled his avatar using a remote control directly from the cult. Suddenly, the speed of signal transmission to the robot dropped sharply. The transmitter in the doll's body has reached its usage limit and lost its fast connection speed. Suddenly, the hero's clone used the technique of disintegration. Then a powerful blow landed right on the belly of the ferocious tiger. The robot quickly landed next to Kate, startling her greatly with its appearance. He He took aim and with one shot made a huge hole in the beast's head. After the battle was over, Albert made fun of the girl who forgot to shoot in time. The main character stood up and sighed with relief. Now all that was left was to improve the doll. A month later, the magician visited Thomas and Riley, surprising them with his appearance. The twins simultaneously bowed to the master as a sign of respect. Through the fence, the boy looked at one of the small turtles that the students were supposed to feed. Only the head of this animal was visible above the water. Several more greatly enlarged amphibians then emerged from the lake. They began to happily snatch treats from the main character's hands. Albert also noted the rather rapid development of the twins. Suddenly, Riley complained that the turtles stopped paying attention to her after the hero arrived. Thomas asked him to leave, as he was interfering with his concentration of spiritual powers. Suddenly, Grapevine notified the owner of the arrival of Henry and another new student. The boy greeted his new teacher, who immediately noticed his unusual eyes. Albert used the technique almost instantly and looked into the memories of his guest. He accused him of using reincarnation. The boy did not understand what was going on. The protagonist waved his hand and asked the boy to explain his motivation for joining the Spirit Mystery sect. The guest explained that he was driven by a sense of revenge against the werewolves for the destruction of his village. As soon as he was reborn, he immediately found himself in the thick of military action. Albert smiled, extended his hand and invited the boy to become his student. He bowed to the master. It was an honor for him to be trained by such a capable warrior. Right after that, he said his name. His name was Jacob. A few minutes later, the hero asked Bruce to take the twins to class and give a tour to the new student. The protagonist noticed that Jacob is not who he claims to be, or he is endowed with a divine gift. Henry soon reported that he had located the boy's parents in the nearest town. Albert ordered him to immediately send some people from the sect to them to take care of them. The ash-haired disciple said that he had used the reincarnation technique about 11 times already. The magician advised to reduce the use of this ability. The guy was surprised. He then handed Henry a scroll to help stabilize his emotional state after waking up. All the happy memories of the teacher flashed before the student's eyes. He stood up and bowed, thanking him. Albert patted the boy on the back, tears streaming down Henry's face. Meanwhile, Bruce gave Jacob a short tour of the cult's territory. They praised the local nature, demonstrating its extraordinary beauty. The man also showed the new student a special gate that protects the sect and all its inhabitants from outside view. Jacob couldn't stop looking at the beautiful spiritual waterfalls. The boy immediately remembered his terrible stay in the world of the small Hillicosm, where he reached the stage of laying the foundations only in old age. Bruce praised the training grounds located here, and the student was eager to get started. Jacob turned pale when he heard that all the sect's disciples were in the tempering stage. His companion reassured the boy, saying that everything was not as simple as it seemed. A few days later, Jacob was sitting in his private room, writing on a scroll. In it, he noted all the technological discoveries of the sect of the mystery of the spirit that he had noticed. The guy grabbed his head abruptly, not understanding how such a simple community had reached such heights. Soon the student forgot about these thoughts and immersed himself in the process of diligent training. At this time, Alex was filming Claire, and her brother Richard was also in the frame. Albert was incredibly happy that all was well with his old friends. Suddenly, Henry made a remark about the fact that character is important in girls, not beauty. The boy began to think about ladies who were passionate like fire and calm like calm. He also remembered graceful women and girls as delicate as flowers. Proud, warlike, and fearless girls also came to his mind. The main character didn't listen to him at all, being immersed in memories of the beautiful Claire. The student reproached his teacher for looking only at the girl's appearance and not at their inner beauty. The hero didn't like this and he got very angry, throwing popcorn around. The mentor asked Henry to stop bothering him with his deep thoughts and let him enjoy the beauty of the girl through the screen. In the end, Albert ordered the boy to write a poem about each beauty that Alex photographed. After that, he decided to return to watching. The student chuckled maliciously. Suddenly, Kate appeared on the screen, happy that she was able to get through to the teacher. The girl happily announced that she and her brother would go to the front at the request of the Council of Elders. The twins looked thoughtfully at the gathered crowd of volunteers. The situation in the war was not going very smoothly. Kevin agreed to obey his sister in everything, which made her very happy. Suddenly, Kate noticed an unfamiliar guy standing to the side. The girl approached him and asked what such a young man was doing at the departure point to the front. Suddenly, a big guy passing by pushed him hard, and his sister managed to grab the stranger. The guy became embarrassed and said that he was an outer disciple of the Heavenly Forge sect. The twins' faces have changed. It is in this sect that they make the ships that their mentor dreams of. The stranger thanked Kevin and Kate for their kindness. but they had selfish plans for him. The guy's name was Charles. He was a B-rank blacksmith, which was quite impressive. At that very moment, the brother and sister exchanged sly glances, clearly plotting something. Kate showed the guy her bracelet made by Albert to find out if such a blacksmith could join their sect. The young man was blinded by the beauty of this piece and noticed powerful runes. Charles asked to be introduced to the author of the bracelet, and the twins promised to fulfill his request. Suddenly, a spatial gate appeared above their heads, preparing to open. Meanwhile, a giant spaceship passed over the portals to the world of humans and werewolves. On the ship, a man spoke to an unknown guy with mysterious symbols on his face. The monsters were preparing a trap. The guy promised to outwit them and clenched his fist tightly. Upon arrival at the front, Kate and Kevin said goodbye to their new friend and hit the road. At this time, the situation on the front lines was not very good. The monsters almost destroyed the defense. A moment later, the twins joined the squad, ready to join the fight. Having assessed the situation, the sister went in search of a suitable firing point. One of the warriors noticed that Kevin seemed to be frozen in place and reproached him for this. Soon the guy asked everyone to move away so as not to interfere with his fire technique. Immediately after this, the monsters were surrounded by streams of hot lava. More demonic hands burst out of the ground and grabbed the remaining monsters. The warriors could not be more pleased with the appearance of such a powerful comrade in their squad. Albert, accompanied by Henry, watched everything that was happening at the front with interest. The boy pointed to his friend who had perfectly fit into the military mood. Suddenly, the student noticed that a scary eagle was aiming at Kevin. The mentor offered him a bet because he was absolutely confident in the warrior's skill. Hearing about the husky from his angry teacher, Henry froze and asked who it was. After this, the boy asked to give him such a cute dog. At this time, a bird of prey struck Kevin with its lightning, and he was engulfed in streams of electricity. Suddenly, a bullet pierced the flying monster's head, instantly killing the beast. Kate noted with pleasure the perfect accuracy of her shot. The entire squad immediately rushed to the just-rescued Kevin. The guy reassured his comrades, saying that he felt very well. The fierce fighter shared one of the wisdoms his mentor taught him. Albert watched his student with a smile, incredibly happy for him. Henry called himself and his comrades unworthy of such a good teacher. The hero was puzzled. The magician asked the boy not to show him too much respect. The next day, Riley was sweetly and carefree feeding the turtles. Suddenly, she took out a huge pill and offered it to the animals to try. It gave off a wonderful aroma. The main character did not see this scene. He was trying to find out the outcome of the war using a compass of predictions. Suddenly, something huge jumped out of the water, greatly frightening Albert. Suddenly, one of the turtles took out almost all the monsters with one blow. The mentor asked Riley to show him the magic pill, because perhaps the monsters had sensed it and rushed over. A few minutes later, the hero was already conducting a thorough examination of the unusual tablet. The magician praised the student and allowed her to take ingredients from the warehouse that were needed to develop the pills. After this, Albert decided to bring Chris and the other friends back to the Spirit Mystery sect. During this time, Nicholas fought with brutal werewolves. The old man said that this battle was just an empty phrase because the real battle was taking place behind the scenes of the war. In space, ships of people and monsters fought fiercely. The human mages did their utmost to ensure that the monsters had no advantage whatsoever. A powerful explosion marked the end of this battle. The human kingdom won. A guy with mysterious signs on his face ordered the warriors to collect the war trophies, because the merging of worlds would soon begin. Meanwhile, the man from the Heavenly Dragon Palace ordered the people to prepare for the complete extermination of the vile werewolves. Dozens of warriors with flying swords appeared above Kevin's head. The guy noticed a strange rush in the attack because no one had even collected the trophies. At this time, a creature resembling a huge bat arrived in the forbidden area of the ancient werewolves. It was under the surveillance of people who ordered him to remove the seal immediately. The monster smiled, calling them pathetic and cruel. The next moment, he touched the ground and several fountains of blood burst out from it. These rays rushed into the sky, beginning to form mysterious portals. Suddenly, a giant hand of a monster burst out of the earth's crust. It appeared completely and growled shrilly, demanding a huge amount of fresh flesh. The mages began desperately trying to contain this hellish creature until their master arrived. Soon, several dozen sharp magical swords were aimed at the monster. With one movement, the creature destroyed them all, remaining completely unharmed. One of the wizards, choking on blood, asked his master for forgiveness. The monster growled loudly, once again showing off its terrible face. Suddenly, the hellish creature was blinded by a giant flower that appeared out of nowhere. The ruler turned out to be a guy with symbols on his face. He asked to entrust the victory over the monster to him. Kevin watched all this from afar, holding his breath. Suddenly, the communication device in Kate's pocket vibrated. Albert ordered the twins to return immediately because the situation in the world was starting to get tense. Meanwhile, the main character told Riley that he was going into seclusion and asked him to bring him food and feed the turtles. Jacob suddenly appeared. The teacher called him for an important conversation. The magician explained that he could not develop a personal ability for the guy because all of his skills were quite highly developed. He turned around and noticed a strange aura around the newly arrived student. The boy asked to be taught powerful spells. Forging and alchemy had long bored him. The hero took out a jade tablet and, pointing his finger at Jacob, offered him a special technique. The guy scanned the scroll carefully. It was very useful. Albert turned his attention back to the student's aura, which was characteristic of people who used reincarnation. The mentor smiled sweetly and suggested that the boy confess everything himself. The spirit mystery sex guns were aimed at Jacob, as he might be a spy. The student recognized the intelligence and resourcefulness of the protagonist, seeing his gloomy face. He confessed that he was an immortal from another world and found a treatise on achieving indescribable power in 9 reincarnations. The guy also explained that he was currently living his 8th life, and Albert removed the guns using the remote control. The magician admitted that he was unworthy of such a powerful disciple and handed him a bag of spiritual stones. Jacob refused the generous gift, instead asking to remain as a disciple of the sect. The hero was unhappy because his presence here put the other students in danger. The guy promised to protect them. The boy also handed his mentor scrolls with valuable spells and techniques from his world. Just upon seeing them, Albert called Jacob the best of his students. Soon the protagonist walked the boy away and suggested meeting for a cup of tea. After this, the magician thoughtfully looked at the weapon control panel, which he had not yet had time to use. A moment later, he finally pressed the coveted red button. Hundreds of cannons fired from the sky, creating a huge fire cloud. Where they shot, there was nothing left but scorched earth. Albert burst into loud and frightening laughter, realizing the full power of the sect's weapons. Suddenly, his phone rang. The call was from the Council of Elders. They were concerned about the recent explosion on the island. The hero hastened to explain the situation to them. Meanwhile, Charles thanked the twins for walking him to the workshop. Kevin tugged his sister's hair sarcastically to get her attention. Kate got very angry and almost hit her brother, who was pointing at the sign of a nearby building. It turned out that they were standing right next to the forge of their teacher's old friend. Inside, Richard was working hard, wiping sweat from his hot face. The twins entered the forge and greeted their old acquaintance. The blacksmith smiled sweetly when he recognized the visitors as Kate and Kevin. 3 months later, the protagonist finally came out of seclusion, being terribly tired. Albert remembered his conversation with Richard, who asked to be accepted into the sect of the Mystery of the Spirit. A few minutes later, the young man had already thrown himself into the arms of his friend, and Chris had also arrived with his family. Suddenly, he fell to his knees and vomited right at the feet of his old friend. The magician asked Richard with concern what had happened to him. He explained this incident by the island's overly dense spiritual aura and promised to get used to it. Suddenly, huge golden chains appeared in the sky above the sect. Jack asked Albert in fear what the hell was going on. The main character took a compass for fortune-telling out of his pocket. The Lord with symbols on his face began activating the chains of the worlds and ordered that all sects be notified of the approaching difficult battles. The hero saw all this with the help of his magical and very useful artifact. Suddenly, the magician noticed the dark and languid gaze of that stranger. Albert received a message about the upcoming merger of worlds. He angrily smashed it, not wanting to take part in it. The protagonist ordered Jack to train harder and Eve to try to cure Chris. He appointed Richard as the head of the blacksmith department, who was in shock because he had just arrived on the island. Immediately after this, the hero dragged him to Vinogradinka, with whom he would have to work. After some time, they reached the underground workshop where the dolls worked. Richard was stunned to see how much his friend had accomplished in just 10 years. Dylan soon phoned the magician to tell him that the cost of materials had increased by 50%, so he would have to triple the cost of the product. Albert cried with joy because the fat man had already earned him an impressive capital. At this time, several ferocious bears attacked a detachment of warriors on the border of the two countries. With the help of their techniques, people managed to chain them into tree trunks. Suddenly, one of them broke free and headed towards the confused girl. At that very second, Kevin's silhouette appeared behind the wild beast. He doused the werewolf with a stream of water, then froze him with an ice technique. With his next movement, he struck the block of ice, breaking the beast's body into small pieces. The rescued girl's name was Audrey, and she thanked the guy for his heroism. Kevin was noble and responded in kind. The unexpectedly wounded bear promised to tell the warriors about the treasure of his tribe in exchange for freedom. At the same moment, a lightning-fast and accurate bullet pierced his chest. After reloading her rifle, Kate declared that she had nothing to negotiate with the defeated enemy. Audrey noted the girl's extraordinary talent and enjoyed being in the company of the twins. Kevin extended his strong fist to her and promised to meet again. He said that he wanted to make a bet on the number of werewolves killed, and the girl was surprised. A moment later, the boy and Audrey bumped fists to end their argument. A few minutes later, the warriors went to another place, leaving the twins alone. Kate complained to her brother about the lack of battle trophies, as there were too many other fighters in the area. Kevin suggested exchanging the loot they had for tablets with spells and going to the teacher. The sister agreed. Meanwhile, nearby, Nicholas was cutting down monsters with his sword, being in a group from the Royal Swordsman sect. The old man suggested that he go to the ancient werewolves for truly valuable resources. After some persuasion, the young man agreed and separated from the group. The untrustworthy old swordsman hoped that the Lord had placed seals on the dangerous monsters. At this time, the giant colossus was immobilized by the technique imposed by the Lord. Nicholas was able to get to a very valuable flower using the blood of werewolves. Suddenly, a huge boulder began to fall right on him. He managed to dodge it at the very last moment. In addition to this, a large pack of bloodthirsty werewolves was running towards the swordsman. 5 minutes ago, near this place, Kevin and Kate were fighting with evil rats. The girl offered to lure out their leader in order to get valuable prey. The guy agreed. Soon the sister took up a favorable position and began shooting at the monsters. Immediately after this, a crowd of rats chased after Kate's doll. In the present, Nicholas was trying to escape from this pack of aggressive rodents. Meanwhile, the twins successfully defeated the werewolf leader and celebrated their victory. Kevin grabbed the Rat King's head to exchange it. He was eager to get home. The swordsman could only fly away on his magic blade, bursting into bitter tears. A little later, the twins successfully exchanged the loot for the tablets with heavenly runes and were already heading back to the sect. An unknown girl, hiding behind an umbrella, cast a suspicious glance at them. A few seconds later, the brother and sister quickly dived into the alley. The stranger and her comrade, who were thieves, decided to immediately follow them. The girl saw with sadness that their potential victims had already flown away. The disgruntled couple tried to keep an eye on Kate and Kevin. The twins stuck out their tongues at the flying thieves. They looked strange. It turned out that they had taken the form of poor children and sent away their illusions. A few hours later, Kate and Kevin were already showing their gift to the main character, who was drooling with joy. The magician blushed with embarrassment and promised to make useful, legendary-class weapons for his students. Soon, Albert's face changed, informing the twins about the imminent beginning of the merger of worlds. Kate rushed off to find new treasures to avoid the rigors of training. Kevin, on the other hand, expressed a desire to get started with them as soon as possible. A few days later, his sister was out walking in search of valuables and was followed by unknown people in hoods. Later, Bruce burst into the protagonist's room and delivered terrible news. Soon the manager of the sect showed the master Kate's disfigured body. She was brutally beaten, and one of her arms was cut off. The brother rushed to his sister to give her some water. She was covered in terrible wounds. The girl let a tear run down her torn cheek, reporting that the attackers had stolen the ring given to her by the hero. The mentor reached out to the student's body, which was completely covered in blood. Kevin cried. Albert promised to severely punish those who committed this terrible attempt. Vinogradinka took control of several dolls and went in search of the culprits. Meanwhile, the thieves discussed the attack on Kate, regretting that she was able to escape. One of the bandits convinced his comrade that no one could find them. The ring in the attacker's hand glowed blue, and the protagonist learned his location. Meanwhile, Albert's clone, under his control, stood on the hill, watching the group of people. He leaned against the huge cannon, his angry face not auguring anything good. Several people were making a deal to exchange valuable treasures, while two strangers were watching them. A moment later, they attacked a group of unsuspecting people. With one movement of his sword, the bandit cut off the head of the unlucky buyer. The warrior tried to resist the unexpected guests. Using powerful technology, the thieves killed everyone who remained with a large explosion. The protagonist, who had been waiting for the right moment for a long time, finally activated the trap. A powerful impulse from the satellite was sent to the place where the bandits were located. Several metal pipes fell on the unsuspecting thieves. They stuck into the ground, forming a circle with a barrier, inside which the thieves were located. One of them ordered his partner to get out of there immediately. Albert watched them and did not plan to leave them any chance of salvation. The bandits tried to fly, but they were immobilized by an electric field and fell to the ground. Suddenly, one thief noticed a strange movement on the top of a nearby hill. He suspected something was wrong and rushed to use technology to save himself. Soon, there was a powerful explosion, and the thief managed to climb inside the armored sarcophagus. When the smoke cleared, only a wooden coffin remained inside the field. The main character screamed in rage. He wanted to take revenge on Kate's offenders. However, the second bandit was defeated. The hero's clone approached him. He grabbed him by the clothes with his metal hand and headed back to the sect. At this time, Kate came to her senses and begged the clone of her mentor to stop giving her the expensive medicine. A moment later, the teacher surrounded her with his magical aura and declared that there was nothing more precious to him than her life. He also showed the recovered girl that he had already gotten even with one of the attackers. Suddenly, Kate looked down and wanted to say something. The magician looked at her carefully. A second later, the student thanked Albert and hugged his hand tightly. The main character also hugged the unfortunate girl, and they became like father and daughter. Wiping the tears from Kate's face, he asked why her brother wasn't with her now. The girl explained that he considered himself partly to blame for what happened and therefore could not be around. She suddenly glared at the teacher and promised to train harder so as not to let herself be bullied again. Albert stroked her head. He was glad that the worst was behind him. A second later, there was a knock on the door. The hero did not invite guests. When the door opened, Chris, his wife and son were standing on the threshold. The guy was holding a mixture in his hands that helps heal wounds. Jack gave her a sword of luck, which will help the girl in all her endeavors. Eva brought a valuable pill with phoenix blood. Kate burst into tears of happiness because she was surrounded by such good and caring friends. Chris whispered in Albert's ear that they needed to discuss something. He was worried that Henry would soon break through to the next stage and possibly learn the truth about his father. The hero hastened to calm him down, but the guy was already terribly frightened. The main character suggested that Chris confess everything himself and dissuade Henry from taking revenge. The guy became determined and agreed to do it immediately. The next morning, the ash-haired student called his mentor while he was having breakfast. The student said that Chris had just admitted to being the father. Albert smashed his mug and felt embarrassed because he had only asked his friend to talk about it and not to declare it directly. Henry reassured the master and informed him that his father was fine. Half an hour ago, Chris came to him and told him everything as it was. The boy immediately used his reincarnation technique on him and put his father into a sleep where he would be with his mother. After this, Henry happily explained to the teacher that he had finally overcome his inner demons and was no longer seeking revenge. The main character immediately headed towards the exit of his room. He would have to clean up the mess again. Soon he came to Chris and asked how everything went. The guy was sad. He burst into tears because Albert had interrupted his sleep, where the warrior was happy. The hero suddenly shoved a pill of oblivion into his mouth, which would help him calm down. Chris softened a little. Saliva flowed from his mouth. The magician said that this effect would soon pass. A few years later, a clone of the protagonist delivered combat dolls to a secluded cave so that they would catch potential enemies off guard. A couple of years later, Jack and Henry were ready for a breakthrough, but they couldn't do it now so as not to disgrace their mentor. After a long time, the Lord ordered preparations for the merging of worlds and asked the Heavenly Forge sect to reduce the prices of ships. He smiled sarcastically, anticipating the imminent large-scale war. Soon, the protective dome over the central continent was destroyed by werewolves. Albert, who had aged considerably, was unhappy with this state of affairs, since he had very little time left before the breakthrough. The monsters dropped special teleportation discs on the ground to transport themselves to the human world. Suddenly, the huge silhouette of the Overlord appeared and ordered all the sects to prepare for war. Riley, sitting on the shell of a huge turtle, noticed a strange phenomenon in the sky, similar to a meteor shower. Vinogradinka informed the owner about a possible imminent invasion of werewolves on the island. The old man's face was calm because he had already taken care of the defense long ago. At this time, several ferocious monsters jumped out of one of the portals. The battle dolls of the Spirit Mystery sect began to gather at the place where they appeared. The leader of the pack growled loudly, forming the silhouette of a cruel beast's muzzle right above him. The dolls prepared to use huge cannons to hold back the enemy onslaught. Albert ordered Vinogradinka to strengthen the defense because he needed another 20 days to break through. The core of one of the guns pierced the defensive equipment of the werewolves. The monsters panicked and demanded that reinforcements be sent immediately. A moment later, all the werewolves were destroyed by a powerful explosion. Members of the Council of Elders arrived at the scene of the battle and began to assess the situation. A second later, the monsters' portals were destroyed with metal rods. Kevin and Kate arrived to help the Spirit Mystery sect. The sister used electrical technology, and the brother used the element of fire. A fireball formed in the sky, emitting lightning. Kate advised her brother to hurry because the mentor would break through very soon. Kevin has created a giant lava demon that will speed up the battle. A little later, instead of werewolves, only their smoldering corpses remained. The twins asked the Council of Elders to take care of the remaining monsters. The council representative promised to fulfill their request and also visit the sect in the future as a sign of respect. The brother and sister immediately rushed to their mentor so as not to miss his breakthrough. When they arrived, Henry and Jack were already standing at the temple. The ash-haired boy said that the master's ascension could happen at any moment. A huge bell appeared in the sky with chains coming out from it. A giant golden dragon circled around all of this. The entire wondrous ceremony was observed by the disciples of the Spirit Mystery sect. Jack was afraid that such a bright spectacle would attract the attention of the enemies. A little later, Jacob looked in surprise at the large brush hovering in the air. The grandeur of the ceremony that was taking place made him cry out in surprise. He envied Albert because no one's breakthrough had ever been accompanied by such a parade. Meanwhile, a golden pill appeared in front of the protagonist's face. By swallowing it, he finally regained his former youth. Immediately after this, he hurried outside and got some fresh air. The magician was met by a crowd of his beloved students who had prepared congratulations. Later, the master ordered them to change their training methods because he had rethought them during the breakthrough. Albert told Vinogradinka the location of Kate's second attacker and asked her to go after him with several dolls. The bandit covered himself with his hood, noticing the strange change in the weather. The main character was filled with a feeling of rage. Kate was incredibly happy to have such a caring mentor. A little later, the magician went down into the dungeon to begin unfinished business. First of all, he began improving Vinogradinka. Albert was eager to see the changes in the robot. He even imagined her as a human. Unfortunately, Vinogradinka remained in the same guise. The robot said that it was ready to work several times faster. The magician could not believe his ears. Strange, unidentified discs appeared in the sky above the sect and were rapidly approaching. These were werewolf portals. The hero asked to leave one of them intact. At the exit, he met a calm Henry, confident in the victory of the sect. Kate, Kevin, and Jack assumed a heroic pose, preparing for the upcoming battle. A moment later, they rushed to attack. A little later, the main character arrived and offered to test his army of 50,000 dolls. The master looked closely at the last disc. It could become their gateway into the werewolf world. The dolls froze the lake he was hovering over to give him an advantage over the monsters. A few seconds later, evil badgers appeared on the ice, having teleported. Their leader immediately fell silent, seeing an entire army of combat robots in front of him. But he did not lose his composure and became filled with rage, almost completely changing his appearance. All the other animals folded their paws across their chests, forming armor on themselves. They immediately rushed to attack. Albert ordered the dolls to surround them. Within seconds, the pack of badgers was already moving straight towards the center of the circle. Soon a warrior from the Council of Elders came to the rescue. The main character asked them for combat support. The man was surprised to see the impenetrable badgers, because they should have died out long ago. He called them quite strong but stupid and subject to any orders. The warrior also pointed to a device attached to the beast's back, with the help of which werewolves can teleport unnoticed into enemy territory. The protagonist ordered Henry to take action, and he immediately began to implement a cunning plan. Using his clone, he forced one of the badgers to open a portal. The beast immediately fulfilled his request and called his relatives. A moment later, a bunch of impenetrable badgers jumped out from there. Henry happily informed his mentor that the monsters were quite weak. A warrior from the Council of Elders agreed to help the sect defeat the most powerful monsters. Albert began to warm up his bones before the next battle. The students were ready for victory. The magician instantly rushed through the crowds of animals, turning them into fountains of blood. Unfortunately, one of them managed to get close to the hero and was already preparing to attack. The main character managed to dodge, and a magic sword was aimed at the werewolf. The council warrior readied his blade to deliver a crushing blow. Suddenly, the sword hit the badger's armor, creating a large shockwave. The wave spread throughout the area, knocking down several battle dolls. Albert grabbed his head and screamed because he did not expect such a turn of events. The animals immediately tried to slip through the hole that had formed in the encirclement. The hero became angry because if even one rodent left the sect, he would face severe punishment from the elders. Luckily, Vinogradinka had marked them and had already sent the dolls in pursuit. Albert put on a businesslike face and told the warrior that not a single animal would leave the island's territory. The magician folded his fingers and advised his students to get ready, but they were confused. When he snapped his fingers, there was an explosion behind him, creating a huge cloud of smoke. The children were delighted by such a sight. The students begged the hero to teach them such an effective technique. Suddenly, a large flower surrounded by tongues of flame flew over the island. A moment later, a stranger began to descend onto the frozen lake. Albert was struck by the beauty of her legs, as if a dog had seen a tasty bone. The unknown girl's name was Sarah. She skillfully mastered the element of fire. She threw her burning axe towards the remaining badgers. Immediately after that, it exploded, and all the animals ran away in different directions. Their leader tried to protect himself with an armored dome, but he couldn't. His armor was damaged. The leader ordered his brothers to flee from here immediately. Sarah glared at them, creating a fireball in her hand. Suddenly, the hero grabbed her wrist and tried to stop the manic girl. Albert donned the armor and advised her to start collecting teleportation funds. Besides, he pointed to the beasts he had just subdued. They would work well for him. Suddenly, Sarah began to stroke the protagonist's hand, clearly showing signs of attention. The fire warrior offered the leader of the badgers a profitable deal. He immediately refused and ordered his men to retreat. Sarah launched several firebolts as the beasts approached the portal. There was a very powerful explosion that hit the magic disc. The teleporter began to spin and prepared for the process of self-destruction. The hero noticed that his new acquaintance could be seriously injured by the blast wave. He grabbed her hand and held her tightly to him to protect her. The magician's face immediately changed, feeling the scent of a blooming rose from her. The girl's beautiful face rested against the main character's mighty chest. After a few minutes, she finally came to her senses. Albert looked at her with concern and advised her to be more careful in the future. Sarah thanked her savior and smiled coquettishly. The girl began to rub against her hero, who tried to restrain his base desires. Suddenly, another disc appeared under the command and prepared to self-destruct. Luckily, Albert reacted in time and managed to surround him with a barrier, thereby stopping the process. The guy threw out a caustic phrase. Sarah pressed herself even closer to him. The lady said that her strength was weakening and she needed to rest immediately. The main character ordered Henry to take care of their new acquaintance. When they left, the warrior from the council explained that his colleague was practicing seduction techniques. The magician tensed up because he had a beloved wife. Upon hearing about the large fortune and several ships that she owned, the hero's face changed. Albert took off his helmet and declared that a true warrior must achieve everything honestly. Soon Sarah returned and thanked the magician for the room he had given her. She was holding a bag in her hands. She hugged the guy tightly and handed him a bag of money for decorating the interior of the sect's houses. The girl also whispered in Albert's ear that she would visit him often. When the council warriors flew away, the hero nervously caught his breath, because it is not easy to resist the charm of such a beauty. A few hours later, the guy was having a heated argument with his clones about Sarah. The doubles offered to give in to her themselves and swindle out a whole fortune. In the end, Albert refused them and, pushing them away harshly, forced them to go to work. A little later, he asked Vinogradinka what the situation was with the badgers subordinate to him. According to her, the animals were still searching for a place suitable for extracting valuable resources. The hero slammed his fist on the table. Today was getting worse with every minute. Vinogradinka reported a new metal alloy that would reduce production costs, and the mage was finally happy. He happily grabbed the piece of metal and ordered Vinogradinka to start producing improved versions of the dolls. She estimated that it would cost around 5 billion, and Albert fell off his chair in anger. He grabbed his head and ordered the robot to hurry the badgers immediately. A few days later, the main character was fishing carefree, sitting on the stern of his flying ship. Kate visited him. All her comrades were fully immersed in training. Albert told her that he was developing a weapon against powerful opponents. He looked closely at the student's face and asked what he owed to her visit. According to the girl, she and almost all the students of the sect lost their fighting spirit. The magician suggested conducting a test to raise it. After these words, the hero broke into a wide smile, baring his snow-white teeth. Soon the main character prepared the arena and was already greeting the future participants of the competition, with a tired Steve standing nearby. Among those gathered were twins Kate and Kevin, as well as Henry. Albert explained that the challenge was a battle royale, at the end of which there would be only one winner. According to the rules, the area will be surrounded by toxic fog, and the area with clean air will gradually narrow. A few minutes later, the protagonist declared the survival games officially open. Immediately after this, the arena with the players was fenced off from the stands by a protective barrier. A student named Mira greeted the assembled spectators and was appointed as a commentator. Steve complained to his mentor that he was not allowed to participate in the test. The protagonist did not do this because the boy often used spells to summon feces. Meanwhile, the warriors have already reached the island where the royal battle will take place. Kate noticed a glow from a box with valuable resources nearby, but it is not safe to go there yet. When she landed, she began to search the nearest box, and the silhouette of an enemy appeared behind her. A disciple named Tim was planning to sneakily attack the sect leader. A moment later, a lightning-fast bullet pierced his chest. At the place of the guy's death, only a box with all his loot remained. Kate grinned evilly, holding the gun in her hand. She managed to feel it in the box. Meanwhile, Mira announced Tim as the first player eliminated from the game. Albert gnawed on the chips and watched his students' actions carefully. At this time, a group of students tried to escape from their pursuer. A second later, Kevin killed the trio with one swing of his fingers. Suddenly, he noticed that the column of light from the main box had dissipated. Apparently, they had already reached it. Suddenly, the guy felt a suspicious movement behind him. The bullet hit right into the lava block Kevin had just created. Hiding behind a rock, he ordered his sister to surrender immediately. Kate stood behind the trunk of a distant tree and invited her brother to come out of hiding. The girl took aim at Kevin's body and prepared to shoot. It was just a clone. The real brother was already behind Kate. A few seconds later, they were fighting fiercely on the ground. When the girl was released, she explained that she had not intended to kill her own brother. Instead, she suggested that Kevin team up against Henry and Jack. The main character watched everything that was happening from the stands. Albert smiled and clapped his hands, anticipating an interesting fight to come. Meanwhile, Mason fought with the dolls summoned by his opponent. A second later, a guy with purple hair shot at him with a flare gun. The big guy managed to dodge the missile at the last moment. This made his opponent very angry because he ran out of ammunition. Mason pounced on his opponent, who felt a strange burning sensation in his eyes. A moment later, the big guy, the guy with the flare gun, and the two dolls stopped, and two students watched them. It was Henry and Jack who used the magic flower. In place of the two warriors, only their boxes remained. It turned out to be a trap for them. The brothers then created an illusion of the main box to lure in new victims. Mira informed the audience about the elimination of two promising students from the game. Albert explained to Steve that true warriors must be prepared to use any tricks to win, and the boy wrote this down. After some time, the twins finally reached the site of the recent battle and noticed Mason's box. Kate placed her hand on her brother's shoulder and shared her concerns. The girl pointed her finger at a nearby rock. Kevin calmed his sister down and offered to take the loot from the box, because it was valuable enough to risk for it. She made a sweet face and hoped that she would find her favorite rifle there. The twins hurried to approach the tempting trophy. As Kate got closer, she noticed a strange glow on the top of the cliff and warned her brother. Kevin managed to dodge the sword flying straight at him at the last second. Immediately after this, Jack went down and took his blade back. Taking the sword in his hands, he challenged Kevin to a fair fight. He surrounded his palm with flame and asked where Henry was now. The ash-haired boy used a magic flower to defeat Kate. The girl miraculously managed to dodge the deadly beam. She greeted her comrade sweetly and prepared her pistol. Albert and other spectators watched with interest what was happening between close friends. Kate screamed loudly, ordering the battle to stop as the poison cloud was nearby. After this, all four of them simultaneously drank elixirs that restored their strength. The boys continued to fight pointlessly, and the girl was unhappy about this. Suddenly, she noticed a safe zone ahead of her ship. Henry tied the twins with vines to prevent them from escaping. They tried to break free, but they couldn't. The brothers were exhausted and could not continue their journey. Their health began to decline. All four were eliminated from the game. Kate wanted to attack Jack and Henry, but her brother held her back. Bruce appeared on the screen, the last survivor. Realizing his victory, the guy began to rejoice madly, raising his hands to the sky. The main character almost fell off his feet when Kate crashed into him. The girl was capricious because Bruce won without killing anyone. After the game ended, Steve begged to be allowed to participate next time, and all the students asked for another game to be held soon. A little later, the main character was in his closet and enjoyed carving various figures out of wood. His eyes filled with sadness as he remembered his old life again. The boy called Vinogradinka to him and asked if he could move through time and space. The robot answered positively. Then Albert looked closely at his hands. Then his gaze turned to the happy wooden family. He stated firmly that he was ready to try to do this. His hands clenched into fists. Later, he came out of his closet and closed the secret passage behind him. The hero sat down on the bed and prepared everything that was necessary. Albert began the ritual, a magical aura surrounding him, rushing upward. Kate was shooting a slingshot. Kevin was reading a book, and behind them, a column of blue light rose from the temple. They watched this phenomenon with their mouths wide open. Soon, the magical glow began to fade rapidly. The protagonist opened his eyes and rejoiced, because the scroll was imbued with the ability to transfer through time and space. The magician looked out the window at what was perhaps his last ray of sunshine in this world. Everything he had experienced flashed before his eyes, and the faces of all his beloved students appeared. Albert shed a stingy tear. He did not want to abandon his new family. The guy ordered to hand over control of the sect to Kate if he doesn't return. The protagonist, at his own risk, directed a stream of his energy into the scroll. After this, Albert's face was blinded by a powerful beam of light, and he closed his eyes. Opening his eyes, the magician saw himself floating in the sky. He looked down and saw before him the most ordinary human city. A screen with a countdown appeared in front of the hero. He was destined to spend only one day here. Upon learning this, Albert decided to immediately go home. After some time, the magician happily opened the door to his house. There he was met by a family who looked at him with surprise. The head of the family rudely asked what he needed here. The main character could not understand who was sitting in front of him now. Suddenly, the man's wife showed him a photo of a guy who looked like him. They noticed the almost absolute resemblance between the stranger and their relative. A man named Fred immediately recognized the hero as his uncle. After Albert asked about his parents and brother, Fred let go of his hand. He turned and looked gloomily at the corner of the room where a small altar stood. The main character's beautiful blue eyes filled with bitter tears. On the table, there were 2 tablets, reminding us of the hero's father and mother. Albert grabbed them from the table, hugged them tightly, and began to sob loudly from hopelessness. Tears rolled down his cheeks. All this time, the boy dreamed only of seeing his beloved parents again. A distraught Fred bitterly reported that they had been waiting every day for their son to return since he went missing. The husband and wife walked the streets with a photograph of the hero to learn about him from passers-by. One day, my father had a heart attack right on the street, and his beloved sat next to him and cried. Tears rolled down her old face, dripping onto the body of her dear husband. After that, she locked herself in her room and did not come out, but only looked sadly out the window. She was worried because she could not protect her son and beloved husband. One day, she passed out from constant stress and anxiety. Before her death, the woman asked the protagonist's brother to find him. The sobbing boy promised to definitely fulfill his mother's request. Albert grabbed Fred's hand even tighter and began asking about his brother because he should still be alive. He quickly turned away from the magician. He was afraid to look him in the eyes. A few hours later, tears came to the protagonist's eyes again. In front of him on the hospital bed lay his aging brother. The old man with an oxygen mask on his face opened his eyes. Instead of Albert, he saw only a dark silhouette. He immediately approached his loved one and took him by the hand. The brother said he was glad to finally find the peace his parents lacked. Suddenly, the machine monitoring his vital signs reported no pulse. Fred immediately rushed to his father. The hero's eyes filled with sadness. The next moment, doctors burst into the room, demanding that Albert and his nephew leave the room. The hero could only silently watch as the doctors took away the bed with his brother. His face was not as happy as usual. Now he had lost everyone who was dear to him. A little later, a saddened Fred returned to him. The man explained that his father had been battling stomach cancer for a long time. Albert did not believe this, because his brother had perfect health. Fred's face changed dramatically. It did not inspire confidence. Suddenly, he rudely declared that he regretted that the main character had ruined the fate of his family. These words pierced the boy's heart. His gaze became glassy. He remembered the old days when he played with his little nephew. Albert's face was filled with indescribable pain. Everyone he cared about had died. In the past, the brother would regularly come to the police department to find out about the progress of the search for the hero. Fred walked away. The main character could not believe that everything happened exactly like this. The guy's time in this world was up. He promised to change the fate of his family at any cost. A few seconds later, the exhausted magician found himself back in his room. According to Vinogradinka, this technique can only be improved if the owner reaches an impressive stage of development. Albert clenched his fist tightly. He had a long and thorny path ahead of him. 2 streams of crimson blood flowed from the tired hero's mouth. Suddenly, students knocked on his room door. The mentor immediately wiped the blood with the sleeve of his robe. A very frightened Kate and Kevin stood on the threshold. Henry and Jack stood behind, all 4 of them very worried about their teacher. He looked at them carefully and thought. Memories of all the joyful moments he had experienced with his beloved students flashed before his eyes. Albert hugged the twins tightly and smiled. He once again recalled the nightmare he had recently experienced and said that he was fine. Upon returning, the hero immediately began to work hard to achieve a breakthrough as soon as possible. Thanks to the compass of predictions, he learned that some kind of disaster would happen in the future. Using his detective skills, the magician realized that the dangerous werewolf would attack him when Sarah was not around. Soon, Vinogradinka began to broadcast an image from the world of monsters. The badgers finally managed to extract enough different valuable ores. The main character already imagined himself bathing in a pile of spiritual stones. Suddenly, the guy felt a terrible gaze on him. One of the clones accidentally almost killed his original, but was saved in time by a doll. At this time, Sarah was sitting alone and drinking some drink from a glass. A little later, Albert joined her, calling her for advice on cultivation. Suddenly, the girl quickly approached him and touched his lips with her finger. The beauty asked the master to be more open and calm. Suddenly, Sarah grabbed him by the waist with her gentle hand. She came even closer and invited the hero to continue the conversation in her estate. He blushed with shame. Soon the couple was surrounded by a pillar of red light serving as a portal. A moment later, they were transported to Sarah's house, with cherry blossom trees blooming all around. The girl quickly climbed the stairs and invited the main character to visit her. Immediately after this, the beauty blew Albert a passionate kiss. Already in the temple, Sarah pressed herself against the hero and told him about her method of cultivation, based on passion. Suddenly, the girl's subordinate came into the room and said that the nearest town was attacked by werewolves, and they needed her help. The powerful beauty ordered to send a message to the council that she would be busy for the next month. Albert immediately guessed that a monster was behind the attack and was going to kill him. At this time, a portal to the world of monsters opened right above the spirit mystery sect. From there appeared a giant snake and its owner, who had very pale skin and sharp, saw-like teeth. With his magical vision, he saw the aura of a fire warrior above the island. Realizing that they had failed to lure Sarah out, the dark forces retreated, taking the form of a cloud of smoke. Albert breathed a sigh of relief. He had managed to gain some time. Suddenly, the girl began to stroke the main character's leg. He blushed, and the fire warrior felt that her guest was not focused. She fixed her gaze on his lips and asked what the magician was thinking about. Suddenly, Sarah brought her head to his ear and licked her lips passionately. It was as if a volcano had exploded inside Albert, holding the guy back from cheating on his wife. He jumped up abruptly and headed towards the exit. The girl was at a loss. She waved at him and suggested meeting the next day. A little later, the hero was practicing a certain spell in his dungeon. One of his clones noticed that the guy had become suspiciously energetic and nervous lately. Finally, Albert finished his work, and the shield floated in the air in front of him. Vinogradinka congratulated the owner on creating a shield that resists lust and temptation. The clone made a sharp jab at his original about his regular meetings with Sarah. The hero did not pay attention to him. His face was calm and unshakable. Now he was not afraid of any human temptation. After some time, lightning struck directly into the body of a giant snake from the werewolf world. Albert was filled with determination, so he used a powerful technique against the monster. The next moment, the snake was surrounded by lightning bolts. The protagonist was on his ship and was ready to deliver a crushing blow. An hour ago, the sect's disciples noticed a strange glow in the suddenly blackened sky. It was a portal from which a huge green snake crawled out. Suddenly, he was caught off guard and struck by several bolts of lightning. Albert smiled and politely introduced himself to his unexpected guest. The main character's antics greatly angered the giant snake. He threw his head back and spat poisonous saliva at the shield above the sect. Several of these projectiles did not pass through the barrier, but they did frighten the magician. This vile act on the part of the monster provoked Albert to call Vinogradinka to him. The hero flew a little into the air, the barrels of guns sparkling behind him. He waved his hand and hundreds of projectiles rushed towards the monster. Meanwhile, Kate, in a safe place, was laughing at the stupid snake. The monster got tired of wasting time, so he rushed straight at the protective dome. The magician called his army to him, among whom was the captured bandit who attacked Kate and was turned into a doll. The girl squealed with joy because the mentor did it for her. The former thief released a stream of magical flowers from his hands at the protagonist's command. The snake immediately made a desperate attempt to escape. Several columns of water burst out of the lake. A moment later, the monster, now looking more like a worm, was trapped. Suddenly, he managed to break free from the water sphere and spit at the magician again. The deadly poison moved at breakneck speed straight towards Albert. The snake hissed loudly, already anticipating his unconditional victory. The bandit, transformed into a doll, covered himself and his new master with his shield. Immediately after this, the hero and the cold-blooded monster exchanged glances. Having finally exhausted his opponent, the guy began to cast magic spells. Soon the huge phoenix struck the slimy body of the snake with its fiery paw. The main character froze in anticipation, and his giant golden silhouette appeared above him with a sword in his hands. A second later, the blade crashed into the flower created by the monster with a roar. Suddenly, the plant began to grow and absorb Albert and his new doll. Kate, Kevin, and Henry couldn't stand to watch this and decided to help their teacher. The boy lost consciousness inside the flower. Everything around was covered in darkness. He woke up in the dark realm, a place that looked quite creepy. The evil spirits circling above him threatened the magician with a terrible and painful death. Suddenly, Albert felt as if one of them had passed through him, and cold sweat ran down the hero's face. He grabbed sharply and tried to scare off the enemies with his magical aura. Having come to his senses, the boy looked up angrily, immediately realizing that these were the souls of people killed by the snake. The nasty and slippery bastard was right above the main character. Suddenly, the magician was pulled by the leg by the ghost of a little girl asking for help. Albert stroked her carefully and promised to soon relieve the unfortunate woman from her suffering. The very angry warrior turned around and glared at his enemy once more, ordering Vinogradinka to strengthen the dolls. A few seconds later, the robot standing next to him was engulfed in a stream of spiritual energy. After this, the wooden warrior began to fill his master with energy so that he could use a powerful technique. The protagonist loudly shouted the necessary spell and crossed his fingers. Soon, a huge golden dragon appeared, instantly dispelling the darkness. A few seconds later, the flower was in his toothy mouth. The dragon swallowed him. The evil snake was in shock and did not understand anything. Immediately after this, the huge creature grabbed the reptile in its paws. They went their separate ways, tearing the scales off the monster's body. The golden dragon pulled the snake as if it were an ordinary string. Albert released a stream of fire from his palm. Immediately after that, a fire bow appeared in his hands and the guy fired. The released arrow headed straight into the mouth of the frightened monster. The dragon added a little pepper and the result was snake kebab. The soul of the monster, leaving its body, promised to certainly take revenge on the main character. The golden giant opened his mouth wide to taste the delicacy. Albert hurried to stop the beast because he did not want to lose his battle trophy. Noticing the loss, the dragon threw a magic flower at the hero, hitting him right in the head. A little later, the magician wiped his forehead and picked up a magic plant from the ground. Kate, Kevin, Henry, and Jack immediately rushed to their teacher. The girl hugged him tightly. He felt incredibly cool. He suddenly moved his glasses up his nose, noticing a shadow above him. It was Sarah, who arrived at the sex territory riding on her whale. As soon as he saw her, the main character shuddered violently. When the girl landed, his chest was allegedly pierced by a terrible pain. Kate immediately noticed the unconscious mentor. He was pretending. The girl blocked Sarah's way and ordered her to immediately leave the master alone. The woman offered to take the guy home in her live transport. Kate said that wooden dolls would do the job perfectly. Albert, who was pretending to be sick, smiled and mentally thanked his student. Soon, the robots were carrying their master on a stretcher, accompanied by his beloved charges. A few hours later, the magician was studying the treasures that the badgers had obtained in the werewolf world. Vinogradinka reported that she had fully analyzed the hollow bone of the serpent. The hero pricked up his ears. He took it in his hands and carefully examined the valuable trophy. Albert soon extracted from it the resources needed to improve aerial weapons. Using his spiritual energy, he began the process of improving his battle companion. Richard was nearby, asking his friend to concentrate on work. The magical field expanded and glowed pink. The hero took the final step. Several silhouettes of cannons appeared in the sky above the sect. The main character and his close friend watched what was happening in surprise. An unexpectedly powerful flow of spiritual energy passed from the satellite to Albert. The guy looked at his hands, surrounded by a magical aura, with distrust. Suddenly, he felt his whole body filling with strength. Energy was seething in the magician's belly. Richard looked at him with fear. Immediately after this, Albert was overcome by a fit of severe pain that knocked him off his feet. His frightened comrade immediately rushed to his friend's body. When the magician came to his senses, the blacksmith pointed out the similarity of the clot of energy to a child, and the hero became angry. Richard looked at Albert's belly with amusement, comparing it to that of a pregnant woman. The main character clenched his teeth in anger, sweat running down his face. Suddenly, he was surrounded by a beam of light descending from the satellite above the temple. The guy fell to the floor and screamed in pain. His whole face turned bright pink. The magician sat down on the wheelchair and asked Vinogradinka to launch the improved weapon into the sky. Immediately after that, it flew up at a gigantic speed. The modified satellite froze in the sky above the Spirit Mystery Sect. The guy drank a glass of water, while Richard read a guide to pregnancy care. A second later, he flew out of the room from a powerful kick from the main character. Left alone with himself, Albert began to stroke his stomach. With the help of spiritual energy, the the guy decided to find out what was hidden in his body. There, he discovered a rather large, shapeless piece of energy. The protagonist touched the rune seal that surrounded him. Noticing something trembling, Albert smiled because it was alive. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. The magician hurried to open it. The charming Sarah stood on the threshold and asked to make the same powerful weapon for her. The hero set a price of 1,000,000,000 and advised the woman to return in 10 years. The beauty took off her ring and put it inside the guy's robe as collateral. Immediately after this, another attack of pain overcame him, and the magician returned to his room. Soon the main character fell fast asleep, immersed in the world of dreams. There he was met by a joyful Lily, who had reached a new stage of breakthrough. The wife pounced on her beloved husband to immerse him in her arms. Suddenly, she came up against Albert's protruding belly and stopped. The surprised girl asked him if he was pregnant. This question caused the guy to have a fit of violent hysteria. That evening, the mentor ate too many portions of dinner, and the twins were worried about him. Soon, Henry brought his signature dish. The teacher swallowed the whole plate almost instantly. Having praised the dish, he ordered the ash-haired guy to cook a few more kilograms. The worried brother and sister decided to find out why the magician was overeating so much. The boy put his chopsticks aside and prepared to tell the twins his terrible secret. Suddenly, Richard appeared out of nowhere and informed the children that there was a small child in their mentor's belly. The blacksmith started chatting nonstop. Kevin and Kate were in a state of severe shock. Wiping his mouth with a napkin, Albert explained that inside him was a clot of energy surrounded by a runic seal. According to him, he only wanted to feed the fetus in his belly. The twins nodded actively, pretending to understand everything. When the brother and sister turned their heads, they found Uncle Richard lying on the floor, bound and gagged. Soon, Bruce entered the room and brought news from the Heavenly Path sect. Among them was an invitation to a talent competition. Albert placed the invitation on the table, and Kevin was excited to take part in the test. Suddenly, the main character began to jump for joy, despite his bloated belly, because winning the tournament is rewarded with a legendary item. His rapture was interrupted by the fact that he tripped and fell. The guy needed help to get up. The master was taken away in a wheelchair by a doll, and the students were unhappy with the magician's carelessness. On the ship flying to the tournament site, he had a hard time, because Jack was driving his mentor crazy. One day, an annoying boy brought one of the students of the Spirit Mystery sect to a depressed teacher. He introduced the main character to Kurt, who was interested in swords but was financially insecure. The student asked Jack not to call him poor. Chris's son insisted. Suddenly, Albert brought his palm closer to the swordsman's face to immerse the boy in his consciousness. The mentor asked the boy to close his eyes and not worry about anything. Soon, Kurt screamed loudly as his entire body was hit by a powerful stream of spiritual energy. When he opened his eyes, he saw an indescribably beautiful place around him. Hundreds of magical swords raced across the sky, and sharp blades protruded from the ground. The student noticed one that stood out from all the others with its unusual golden glow. Suddenly he froze, staring at the pillar of light that emanated from the blade. A few seconds later, Jack and Albert brought him out of his trance and asked Kurt about his deepest desire. He replied with tears in his eyes that he really wanted to immerse himself in the process of studying sword formations. The good-natured mentor immediately handed the poor boy 2 brand new blades and handed him a scroll that contained formation tips. Watching the student run away happily, the main character remembered his old swordsman friend, whom he had not seen for a very long time. At this very moment, Nicholas, who was in the Royal Swordsman Sect's forge, sneezed. The young man's mentor advised him to buy a sheath for his new blades. The swordsman was short of money, and Albert immediately came to mind, who would certainly save the guy from such problems. Suddenly, Nicholas received a message inviting him to a talent competition, and his eyes lit up with happiness when he learned about the valuable prize for the winner. A moment later, he flew to the test registration area like lightning. The protagonist and his best disciples arrived at the city of the Heavenly Forge sect. The view was simply gorgeous. The magician turned to the children and clapped his hands. Kate and Kevin were very scared. The hero began to vigorously wave an imaginary flag and asked which of his subordinates were ready to participate in the test. The twins pretended not to notice the question. Henry and Jack went to the Tower of Illusions. Soon the brother and sister decided to join their comrades. The mentor dropped the flag from his hands. The protagonist stopped them and reproached them for disrespect. Then Kevin and Henry began to fight for the opportunity to win the legendary item for their favorite teacher. Immediately after this, the master handed Kate's brother several scrolls with new abilities and ordered him to recruit a team. Chris's sons decided to go to the Tower of Illusions. The hero said goodbye to them. His student was very angry.